Chapter 146, Breakthrough into a Saint. Master Jian Chen looked through all of the monster cores the Black Leopard mercenaries had. Among the 100 monster cores, a great amount of them were Class 3 monster cores and the rest were Class 2 monster cores. Just seeing the amount of monster cores painstakingly collected was proof of how long the mercenaries had stayed in the mountain range. It was a shame that because of their greed, many of them had lost their lives by Jian Chen's hands, and their bountiful harvest of monster cores was taken from them for Jian Chen to use. Their rewards for their painstaking labor had been taken by someone else. Jian Chen happily stored the 100 monster cores into his own space belt. Although he could personally get 20 or 30 monster cores in a single day, these 100 monster cores were not a small amount. With this amount, he would be able to sustain his cultivation for a few days. I hope that mercenary has accomplished the task I gave him. 10,000 purple coins as a bounty isn't a small amount at all. I'm willing to bet many mercenaries will be tempted by it. Jian Chen muttered to himself before revealing an expectant smile. I hope there are enough monster cores in their bags, this will be a great source of profit. The wage for avarice is death. Since they are trying to deal with me as a result of being unable to resist temptation, they can't blame me for being merciless. As he spoke, a flash of murderous intent radiated from Jian Chen. For the next 2 days, I should work hard to improve my strength. Otherwise, if I come across a strong group, even though they may not be able to seize me, dealing with them will be quite difficult. Moreover, I still need to be able to defend myself from peak Great Saint Masters. With my current strength, going against peak Saint Masters isn't a problem, but if I come across a peak Great Saint Master, that could potentially be dangerous. If it doesn't go well, I might have to run away. While Wake City is only a Class 3 city with a few Great Saint Masters, that doesn't mean there are none to be seen. Just like the rarity of phoenix feathers and unicorn horns, nobody can guarantee that there wouldn't be any Great Saint Masters would come at me as a result of being unable to turn down the temptation of 10,000 purple coins. It seems that I need to quickly break through into the Saint Master level so that if I were to fight against Great Saint Master experts, I would still have a chance. After he made his plans, Jian Chen decided to not kill any more magical beasts and instead walked over to the side of a hill, where there was plenty of vegetation growing through the cracks of a steep rock face. Jian Chen walked up to the wall and gently pushed away the tall grass to reveal a hole. This cavern had been discovered by Jian Chen 2 days ago. Taking out a few materials from his space belt, he fashioned a torch and walked straight into the cavern. The passageway was very narrow. Only one person would be able to walk over the uneven surfaces. Traces of handprints and footprints could be seen all over the place, showing that this cavern had been artificially expanded. Following the curved, 30-meter-long pathway, Jian Chen finally reached the end of the cavern. The circumference of the dead end was around 10 meters, and it had a height of 3 meters. The ground was very flat, and a stone table and bench sat nearby. 2 days before, when he had just discovered the cavern, Jian Chen had already known that others had stayed in this cavern for quite a while. However, a thick layer of dust covered the ground, clearly indicating that it had been ages since a person had last come here. After inspecting the cavern and confirming the security of it, Jian Chen stuck his torch onto the wall and sat down in the central point of the dead end while taking out a few Class 2 monster cores to cultivate. He was definitely safer in this hidden cavern compared to the open outside mountain range, and it allowed Jian Chen to freely enter a state of cultivation as he pleased. After hunting for a few days in the magical beast mountain range, he had amassed a large amount of monster cores. Adding on to the hundreds of monster cores he had gained from the Black Leopard mercenaries, the amount of monster cores in Jian Chen's possession was enough for him to cultivate for 1 full month. Jian Chen wasn't at all worried about a shortage of monster cores. The energy within the monster cores became absorbed into Jian Chen's body at alarming speeds. The powerful energy gathered around his body, and was already gradually condensing into an extremely weak light. Because of the azure and violet glows within his dantian, Jian Chen's cultivation rate had improved 100 times over, but at the same time, the two glows robbed him of his cultivation. Jian Chen would only see a small part of what he absorbed and cultivated. Despite this, his cultivation speed was still a bit faster than before. Within Jian Chen's dantian, the strong saint force began to form the hazy shape of a sword. Although very blurry, it actually looked very similar to his light wind sword, to the point where even the handle of the sword could be more or less distinguished. As Jian Chen continued to absorb the stream of energy within the monster cores, the sword within his dantian began to condense with saint force slowly as it expanded outwards. According to this speed, I will soon be able to break through into the Saint Master level. I estimate that it should take me from 10 days to half a month. But still, that won't do, that is too slow. Jian Chen furrowed his eyebrows in thought. Because of his dantian, all of the energy from the monster cores was being robbed from him, causing him to feel a bit dissatisfied. Let's see if I can take that energy back. Suddenly, Jian Chen's heart shook as he began to concentrate on stealing the energy back from the two glows in his dantian. However, the speed in which the azure and violet glow was absorbing the energy was far too fast. Even when using all of his strength, he was only able to take back a small amount of energy. Despite this result, Jian Chen was still extremely satisfied. With this small amount of energy, his cultivation speed had improved by a good 10 or 20%. If he were to continue with this speed, it wouldn't take him more than a few days to make the breakthrough. In the cavern, Jian Chen was in a deep state of cultivation, but outside of the magical beast mountain range in Wake City, the entire city was in an uproar. When the news had escaped from the mercenary's mouth, no one knew whether or not it was genuine, but it had still caused every single mercenary to give it some thought. This person had a bounty placed on him for 10,000 purple coins. Although he was in the magical beast mountain range, he was alone and badly injured, so his strength would be sharply declining. This piece of unconfirmable news had made many mercenaries travel to the magical beast mountain range in hopes to confirm it. They had to make sure, since it was 10,000 purple coins, and since the target was only a young man who was barely 20 years old, this was a simple task in the eyes of many people. The only trouble they would have would be to locate him. With a mission that had a target like this, there weren't many people that could resist the temptation of 10,000 purple coins. Despite many people telling them that the target this time was not weak at all and had even caused the Tianxiong clan to take a heavy loss, these mercenaries still had no fear. After a few days of Jian Chen staying in the magical beast mountain range, many cities around Wake City had already heard the news of Jian Chen being seriously injured. Many mercenaries had already begun to rush towards Wake City in huge numbers. Seeing the situation swell up like this, a few of the lone mercenaries who had confidence in their strength and luck looked toward the magical beast mountain range. To them, they would take advantage of this situation for their own advantage. In a flash, 7 days had passed. In the caverns of the magical beast mountain range, Jian Chen was sitting with his legs crossed on the ground while he cultivated. The torch on the wall had long since been extinguished, causing it to be completely pitch dark to the point of not being able to see his hands in front of his face. These past few days, Jian Chen had been in a cultivational state for almost the entire time. With the continuous increase in his inner saint force, Jian Chen could clearly feel that his strength was improving by leaps and bounds. While he had cultivated, he didn't move a single inch, aside from the times he needed to change the monster cores in his hand. Although, once he swapped the monster cores, he would go straight back to cultivating. Jian Chen hadn't eaten a single meal or took a sip of water while cultivating. He had sunk into such a deep meditational state that he had almost felt no hunger or thirst. In those days, a third of the monster cores in Jian Chen's space belt had already been used up. Surrounding him was the dust left behind by the spent monster cores piled up in a fine layer, especially on his crossed legs. Chapter 147, Identity revealed. At that moment, a wave of intense energy pulsed out from Jian Chen's body. At this hour, his cultivation speed had gone up by another noticeable amount, yet the energy from within the monster cores was pouring out like stampeding horses. It was already too much for Jian Chen to handle, and so the energy floated in the air around him, looking like a dense white cloud of fog. In the cavern, this fog was extremely noticeable as it floated about him. In fact, Jian Chen's body had begun to light up with the fog surrounding him, making his body stand out in the dark cavern. At the same time, all of his pores expanded to a larger size, almost as if they were the mouths of thirsty children. The white mist-like fog around Jian Chen then began to be swallowed into his body to be used as an energy source, consumed for Jian Chen's cultivation. As the pores on Jian Chen's body began to swallow the energy around him, he began to also feel a slightly painful sensation within his body. It was almost as if he had multiple insects crawling around his body and taking bites. With such an annoying and irritating sensation like this, any person would feel it deep within their hearts. As Jian Chen sat on the ground of the cavern with a peaceful look, he looked like a monk deep in meditation. Despite his peaceful demeanor, he could still feel the pain within his body. However, if one were to look at him, they would not be able to tell he was experiencing any pain. Meanwhile, within his body the energy that was absorbed through his pores was gathering within his dantian, where it was then absorbed by the sword within it. As the saint weapon absorbed the energy, it began to slowly change in a way that the shape of the sword grew more distinguished. All of the energy it had accumulated had added itself to its strength, and with each second the energy was absorbed, the saint weapon grew in length and size. Right now, Jian Chen was already at the threshold of breaking through into a saint master. This show continued on for 4 more hours until the monster core in Jian Chen's hand started to flicker. Immediately, Jian Chen took out a few Class 3 monster cores and began to cultivate again. Time slowly but silently went by, and not too long after, half of the day had been spent. Within the darkness of the cavern, the hazy figure of Jian Chen could be seen cultivating while the white, fog-like energy grew even more condensed, to the point where it was lighting up like moonlight. At that moment, an intense amount of energy flew out from Jian Chen and reverberated all over the cavern. The energy grew more and more intense as it eventually evolved into a squall that roared throughout the cavern. The dust kicked up everywhere and was scattered by the squall of energy. All of the dust surrounding Jian Chen had been blown in every direction as the white fog swirled around frantically, before finally entering Jian Chen's body. In the blink of an eye, Jian Chen had completely absorbed it all at a pace that was far faster than his original speed. With his current strength, he had finally made the breakthrough from a great saint to a saint master. Just as Jian Chen had made his breakthrough into the next level, the 2 glows within his dantian had suddenly stopped stealing the energy from Jian Chen. Jian Chen slowly opened his eyes from his sitting position when all of a sudden a weak, mysterious glow came out from his eyes. Although it was weak, in the darkness of the cavern, it was very noticeable. Feeling that the saint force within his body was incomparably stronger than it was before, Jian Chen let loose an excited smile. Immediately, he brought out his light wind sword to his hand, which emitted a weak glow of light from its blade that dispersed the nearby darkness. An amazing glow gleamed within Jian Chen's eyes as in the next moment, a large amount of silver light was released from the blade as a strong amount of sword chi appeared. Lunging forward, the light wind sword was thrust through the air as a small amount of sword chi separated itself from the sword and shot toward the cavern walls with amazing speed. Within the dark cavern, that silver glow of sword chi shot out like lightning towards the cavern wall without a sound. The moment it struck against the wall, the sword chi disappeared, but not before leaving behind a hole from its impact. Jian Chen's body wavered slightly as he flew toward the wall like a demon possessed and struck out with his sword. PCH. Following the loud sound, the cliff that was stabbed by the light wind sword seemed almost as weak as tofu. The entire blade of the light wind sword had completely inserted itself into the wall and only the handle could be seen. The moment the light wind sword had stabbed into the wall, Jian Chen hadn't felt the slightest amount of obstructions from the momentum, making him feel as if the wall was a piece of bean curd instead of a stone wall. Although Jian Chen could easily stab into a stone wall in the past, it was not as easy as it was now. Slowly pulling out his sword, Jian Chen's heart was filled with confidence. If he were to go against Tianqiong Lai, although he might not win against him, he would at least be able to put up a good fight. Now that his strength was at the Saint Master level, Jian Chen was no longer worried if he were to come across a group of mercenaries. Even if there was a great Saint Master within their ranks, he would at least be able to run away if need be. Recollecting his light wind sword, Jian Chen dusted himself off from all the dust and ignited the fire once more, basking in the glow of the fire instead of the darkness for once. When Jian Chen exited from the cavern, 5 days had already passed. The intense sun was floating high in the sky, indicating that it was noon. Jian Chen calmly looked around himself before setting off in a random direction. I hope that mercenary from the Black Leopard mercenaries did not let me down. Walking into the tall grass-infested forest, Jian Chen muttered to himself. Now that he was a Saint Master, his fighting strength was much higher, and within Wake City, there would definitely be very few people that could contend with him. Jian Chen began to idly stroll through the magical Beast Mountain Range. In this part of the mountain range, Class 2 and 3 magical beasts often strolled through the area. In the past, Jian Chen had to be careful as he walked through this area, but now, as long as he didn't come across another monster on the same level as the golden-striped silver snake, even if it was a Class 3 magical beast, he wouldn't have to worry. Just then, Jian Chen's ears trembled as he heard the soft sound of chatter from the direction in front of him. Jian Chen's line of sight was obstructed due to the extremely dense vegetation and couldn't see who was talking beyond the trees. Harry, we've been searching this area for days and circled around the magical Beast Mountain range many times already. And yet we still haven't come across anyone that looks like Jian Chen. Do you think Jian Chen is still here? What if he already escaped without a trace? Fiji, you can stop your complaining. The magical Beast Mountain range is huge with wild grass everywhere. Searching for a single person in this place is difficult, surely you understand that. Besides, the reports say that Jian Chen is heavily injured. Even if he wanted to run, he wouldn't be able to go far. I'm not even sure if he's currently hiding somewhere trying to heal. That's right, I'm sure that Jian Chen's hiding somewhere with heavy wounds not daring to come out. But it's still so troublesome. Many people have already entered the mountain range, and if Jian Chen wasn't in a secret hiding spot, he would have long since been discovered by a group of people or even eaten by a magical beast. There's some truth to that, but we better slowly look for now. Even if we don't find him, we'll be able to kill a few magical beasts and take their monster cores to cultivate with. As soon as that last line was spoken, the group pushed past some tall grass and walked out onto the road where they could see Jian Chen clearly in front of them. They could see Jian Chen wearing animal leather and his face hidden by the accumulated filth of his time on the mountain range. The moment they saw Jian Chen, the mercenaries looked blankly at him. At the same time, Jian Chen took in the group in front of him. There was a total of 7 or 8 people in front of him with their ages looking to be around 30 years old. Their faces had traces of sweat and filth and their clothes were in a tattered condition, showing that they had been staying in the magical Beast Mountain range for a few days at the very least. One of the mercenaries walked forward to speak to Jian Chen. Fellow friend, judging from your appearance, I presume you've been at the magical Beast Mountain range for quite some time now. Jian Chen's face revealed a smile as he replied, that's right, I've been here on this mountain range for quite a few days. Then I'm not sure if this friend has heard about the most recent news from Wake City. The man asked Jian Chen as he looked at him. Hearing this, Jian Chen had a thoughtful look to him. This one is not sure if you are talking about the one named Jian Chen. Correct, it is indeed about him. It would appear that this friend has indeed come into this magical Beast Mountain range looking for Jian Chen. Judging by your appearances, I presume you've been in the mountain range for longer than we have. But perhaps, do you know any news about Jian Chen? The mercenary said. News about Jian Chen. Jian Chen's smile grew strange as he nodded. You've asked the right person. Indeed, I know the whereabouts of Jian Chen. What? You know where Jian Chen is? Hearing this, the entire group of mercenaries were startled. Due to the words from this mercenary, everyone adopted a joyous expression on their faces. This was what they had wanted to hear, but they hadn't expected to hear it from this animal hide-wearing mercenary. They didn't think that this question they had thrown out casually would be answered in such a way. Fellow friend, where might Jian Chen be? This one asks. a mercenary asked impatiently. To him, Jian Chen was like a mountain of gold, and so he didn't bother to think if he had the strength to fight him. Jian Chen was still smiling as he slowly said, "Not even far away, but right in front of your eyes." Jian Chen looked at them with a curious stare. Seeing so many mercenaries trying to find me, it would seem that the 10,000 purple coin bounty from the Tianxiong clan has enticed many people. Jian Chen thought to himself. Not far away, but right in front of our eyes. Hearing Jian Chen, the mercenaries all repeated what he said under their breaths in thought. Very quickly the mercenaries came to a realization as they snapped their heads at him and stared in disbelief. What? You're Jian Chen. Chapter 148, Spare Us. As the mercenaries cried out, their eyes landed on Jian Chen with shock written all over their faces. Not a single one of them had thought that after looking everywhere in the magical beast mountain range, they would coincidentally come across him. What was more amusing was just how exactly they came across Jian Chen. Another mercenary laughed bitterly as he stared at Jian Chen. "I say, fellow brother, you shouldn't joke around in such a manner just in case some idiot believes what you say and drags you off to the Tianxiong clan for the bounty." Hearing that mercenary, the other mercenaries saw the light and began to force a smile as well. The words Jian Chen had said had truly shocked them. "Fellow friend, right now Jian Chen's name is infamous around this area. It would be best for you if you refrain from joking around like that again, or else you risk having trouble come looking for you," a mercenary said. Not a single one of them believed that this animal hide-wearing person was the Jian Chen they were looking for. Jian Chen laughed and said, "Then what would you need to believe that I'm Jian Chen? According to what we know, Jian Chen's saint weapon is a thin long sword and is quite young. Around the age of 20 to be exact. His speed is quite fast, as is his sword strokes, to the point where even a few Saint Master experts aren't able to dodge them. It was said that because these Saint Masters weren't able to dodge his sword that they died by Jian Chen's hands," a mercenary said. A silver sword appeared in Jian Chen's hands. It was his light wind sword. Laughing, Jian Chen said, "Take a look, the sword Jian Chen uses, is it this one?" Hearing this, the mercenaries looked at the light wind sword in Jian Chen's hands with a curious look. "Ai! Look! This sword here has some resemblance." "That's right, it's quite similar, almost exactly the same." Right away, two mercenaries couldn't help but cry out. Hearing those two, the rest of the mercenaries began to grow serious as they looked at Jian Chen, their attitudes toward him slowly changing. "You really are Jian Chen?" a mercenary stared at the dust-filled face of Jian Chen. As the way things were now, these mercenaries had all came to the conclusion that this person in front of them was the person they had been painstakingly looking for. Jian Chen laughed as he said, "That's right, I am Jian Chen. The Jian Chen that has been chased by the Tianxiong clan. Right now, I stand here waiting to see if you can capture and take me back to Wake City for the bounty." Hearing that, the mercenaries began to laugh out loud as they looked at each other before one of the mercenaries cried out, "My brothers, surround him." With that command, a mercenary rushed toward Jian Chen while the rest of the mercenaries hesitated for a moment before charging along with him, surrounding Jian Chen in a circle. Just as Jian Chen absorbed the light wind sword, both of his hands rested against his chest as he looked at the mercenaries surrounding him. With disdain, he said, "It would appear that many people were tempted by the 10,000 purple coin bounty, but I didn't think that even great saints would come to capture me as well. Could it be that you didn't hear about how many Saint Masters died by my hand, or do you think your strength surpasses those of the Saint Masters?" The mercenaries all looked at Jian Chen with some hesitation as they listened to him, but one of the mercenaries cried out, "Jian Chen, you can stop pretending to be brave. Right now, everyone knows that you are heavily injured, so your strength is nowhere near the same level as it was. It would be best for you if you were to come with us obediently, otherwise, don't blame us for being impolite. By that point, don't say that we bullied you." Jian Chen shook his head helplessly as he muttered, "It seems that the money has really addled your brains to the point where you don't even care for your own lives. Forget it, I don't feel like speaking with you anymore." Jian Chen then stopped talking before his body shook slightly before appearing instantly right in front of a close-by mercenary. Making a fist with his right hand, he slammed it into the nose of that mercenary without any fancy movements. Ah! The mercenary cried out in agony as he held his nose in pain. Blood began to slowly drip down from it, and before long the entire bottom part of his face was covered with blood. Jian Chen's fist had broken his nose. After breaking that mercenary's nose, Jian Chen didn't stop there. Immediately kicking at his stomach, the man was sent flying back 5 meters. Immediately after, Jian Chen's body disappeared and reappeared right in front of another mercenary with a great amount of saint force circling his leg. With that leg, he lashed out at the chest of the mercenary. Bang! Came the collision. The mercenary didn't have any time to react before being sent flying into the air with blood flying out from his mouth. Jian Chen, what a lowly person you are for using a sneak attack. Everyone forward, take him. After Jian Chen had attacked those 2 mercenaries, the rest of the mercenaries were brought back to awareness and flew at Jian Chen with their saint weapons ready to slash. Jian Chen nimbly dodged the attacks and dashed forward, and with his fists at the ready, he attacked a few of the mercenaries at a rapid pace, causing an endless stream of sounds to be heard. Now that Jian Chen was a saint master, he could easily take care of those at the great saint level without using his light wind sword. Every sword user thought their swords to be extremely important, and many viewed the sword to be akin to their second life. Jian Chen was no exception. Looking at these mercenaries in front of him, if he were to use his sword to kill these mercenaries, it would be like killing a chicken with a cow cleaver. Despite Jian Chen utilizing the art of Chinese boxing, these mercenaries were still powerless to respond. Within a few breaths, they had fallen to the ground with bloody noses and swollen faces. Jian Chen clapped his hands together as he looked at the pained mercenaries on the ground and laughed. Do you still believe you can take me in to get that reward? Lord Jian Chen, please spare us please. We were possessed and seduced to the point of foolishness by the thought of the reward. You must be generous, please spare us this time. A mercenary crawled from the ground and began to bow his head to Jian Chen while pleading in a loud voice. Chapter 149, Meeting the Zhou Mercenaries. Once more highlight above for chapter title. Seeing the mercenary continuously bow his head, Jian Chen furrowed his eyebrows. These types of people were the ones he couldn't stand the most. Fiji, what are you doing? Hurry up and get up. You're throwing away our face. Even if we die, that will be it. What use is there to fear? Seeing that mercenary continue to bow his head down at Jian Chen, one of the other mercenaries couldn't help but curse at him. Fiji, you cowardly bastard, in my entire life I have never seen such a brother like you. The mercenary called Fiji, who was kneeling, had caused the rest of his mercenaries' friends to look on at him with an extreme amount of disdain. Jian Chen looked at the mercenaries who were shouting at Fiji with some admiration. For those who clung to their lives so cowardly like Fiji, Jian Chen held them in contempt the most. Do you have something to say still? Jian Chen ignored the one who was bowing his head and looked at the other mercenaries. Hearing that, the mercenaries looked at each other with a sorrowful look of regret. They clearly knew that they were under Jian Chen's mercy, but it was most likely that they would stay within the magical beast mountain range forever without being able to see tomorrow's sun. Whether you kill us or cut our flesh, do what you wish, there is nothing more to say. A stubborn mercenary said firmly. Jian Chen had brought them to heel by using his fists and legs alone. This type of strength had caused them all to consider running away, but they clearly knew within their hearts that running away would have practically no chance of success. I'll give you all one chance to live. Hand over all of your Class 2 monster cores, and you may go. Otherwise, you will all die here. Pick now, I will wait for your decision. Jian Chen said gently. Faced with that decision, none of the mercenaries hesitated at all. Immediately nodding their heads, they all obediently took out every single Class 2 monster core from within their space belt and piled them all together neatly. Although they were all very reluctant to part with them, they weren't stupid and knew that this wasn't the time to be stingy. Jian Chen swept his gaze over the pile where there weren't even over 10 Class 2 monster cores. Now hand over the monster cores. Obediently, one of the mercenaries scooped up the monster cores from the ground and placed them all within Jian Chen's hand. Once Jian Chen took the monster cores in his hands, he waved them away. Go on then, I'm feeling generous today. I may be letting you go, but if we meet each other again in the same situation, don't expect it to be the same. The mercenaries didn't bother to stay around and ran with their tails between their legs. Seeing the mercenaries disappear into the forest, Jian Chen smiled as he stored away the Class 2 monster cores within his space belt. Kneading his fists, he muttered to himself, I don't know how long it has been since I've used my fists to attack people. Although it feels a little weird, it's not all that bad. For these mercenaries, killing Class 2 magical beasts for their monster cores is not an easy task. I've taught them a lesson, but since this is their only source of Class 2 monster cores, this will definitely not be the last time I will see them. Sooner or later, many more people will come by this way. Haha, I don't know how many people there will be, but with a prize of 10,000 purple coins, I hope that even stronger people come. Otherwise, my plan will progress too slowly. With this type of good opportunity, I will definitely profit as much as I can. Since all those who are trying to find me are enemies, I won't need stay my hand. The weak are food for the strong, this is the absolute rule of this world. Jian Chen's face slowly revealed a look of expectation. Because of his cultivation, his monster core consumption rate was dozens of times or maybe 100 times more than others. He had no other choice but try to earn more monster cores because of the glows in his dantian. He had been forced to give up using the world essence to cultivate and now only relied on the monster cores instead. Not too long after the mercenaries had left, they immediately spread the news of Jian Chen's whereabouts. Soon enough, Jian Chen's position in the magical beast mountain range was well known by everyone. Quickly, every single mercenary and other parties of power began to rush over to try and overtake him. At this moment, Jian Chen was sitting in the area with no intentions of leaving. Sitting on a tree 30 meters away, he was completely concealed by the tree leaves with barely any parts of his body being visible between the gaps in the leaves. In this situation, it was very difficult to see him. Not too long after, a group of 40 mercenaries slowly walked into the area near where Jian Chen was sitting. All of them were wearing steel helmets with full body armor while being armed to the teeth. Not a single one of them looked to be in disarray, and instead looked to be very well trained. The moment Jian Chen saw these mercenaries through the gaps in the leaves, the name of a single mercenary group flashed through his brain. Immediately, a flash of killing intent could be seen in his eyes as his face grew serious. Crash! A sound came from within the leaves as Jian Chen leaped down from the tree top. What person? Be careful, someone came down from the trees. Just as Jian Chen flew down from the treetops, the armored mercenaries below began to shout as each one of them pulled out a saint weapon at the ready to fight. Jian Chen's feet kicked off the tree, causing him to fly 20 meters forward before finally landing nimbly on the ground right in front of the mercenaries. Who are you? The frontmost armored mercenary stepped toward Jian Chen yelling for him to identify himself. Jian Chen's solemn face looked through the group with a careful eye. It was a shame that he saw no familiar figures within the group. You are the Zhou mercenaries. Jian Chen said, it was no question. That's right, we are the Zhou mercenaries. Who are you, and why do you block our path? The mercenary who was at the front slowly demanded. The Zhou mercenaries weren't weak, and could be considered to be within the top 5 mercenary groups within Wake City. Adding on to their affiliation with the Zhou clan in Wake City, it had given them plenty of arrogance. Once he had confirmed their identities, a large amount of killing intent emerged from Jian Chen in waves of energy. Without any more words, Jian Chen took out his light wind sword and began to charge at the Zhou mercenaries. The last time Jian Chen had met the Zhou mercenaries, they had came across a Class 5 cub in the magical beast mountain range. Although the original members of that Zhou mercenary group weren't here, they had cost the flame mercenaries their lives and caused them to lose the Class 5 cub. Plus, while running away from the Class 5 Golden Fur Tiger King. If it weren't for that member of the Zhou mercenaries who threw the cub at Captain Kendall, the Golden Fur Tiger King wouldn't have chased after the Flame mercenaries. So the entire destruction of the Flame mercenaries and the death of everyone in it could all be blamed on the Zhou mercenaries. Chapter 150. Extermination. Jian Chen quickly closed the 10 meters between him and the Zhou mercenaries. With his light wind sword, he thrust it toward the frontmost mercenary's throat in hopes to kill him. In a flash, the sword had found itself right in front of his throat. Seeing the sword come at him with incomparably fast speeds, the leader's face underwent a drastic change as he realized that he wasn't able to react in time to block with his own saint weapon. Hastily, he twisted the entire top half of his body to dodge this fatal sword strike, and without hesitation, he retreated backward in order to gain some distance from Jian Chen. Even after Jian Chen's attack had failed to land, his face did not waver at all. Continuing onward, he dashed forward toward the other Zhou mercenaries ahead of him and lashed out with his light wind sword and stabbed 4 great saints through their throats in a flash. Their armor was of no use as Jian Chen had speared through the steel metal as if it were tofu. To make a long story short, in the instant that the 4 mercenaries were killed, the other Zhou mercenaries hadn't even had time to react. From the moment Jian Chen had moved his hand to the moment the 4 mercenaries had been killed, the other mercenaries didn't even have time to breathe. "Stay your hand." The first mercenary that had dodged Jian Chen's blade cried out. After seeing how fast Jian Chen had struck out, he had realized how strong he was. He would not be an easy opponent, so at this current moment, there was no way the Zhou mercenaries would want to fight against this person without reason. However, Jian Chen had turned a deaf ear toward him. The Zhou mercenaries were already on the top of his to-kill list. His light wind sword flashed continuously as it wreaked havoc on his surroundings, his blade almost resembling the death god's scythe that reaped the lives of the Zhou mercenaries without mercy. The great saints of the Zhou mercenaries simply had no chance to defend themselves. They weren't able to catch sight of the blade and thus were stabbed straight through the throat. Even the saint masters among the Zhou mercenaries could only defend themselves against a few strikes before Jian Chen claimed their lives with his light wind sword as well. Jian Chen's strength against saint masters was far stronger than it was before his breakthrough now. These saint master experts would no longer have the ability to harm Jian Chen, and just touching his clothes would already be a difficult task. Jian Chen's figure constantly flickered as he traveled in between mercenaries almost as if he were creating doppelgangers of himself. As he paid attention to his surroundings, each strike toward his body was carefully predicted and dodged. While he was able to injure the enemies around him, his enemies weren't able to do the same to him. Jian Chen's attacks were incomparably sharp beyond anyone's imagination. In the midst of 40 mercenaries, Jian Chen had already stabbed and killed 20 mercenaries within the span of a few seconds, some of which were saint masters. Seeing how Jian Chen didn't even expend much energy after killing 20 mercenaries so quickly, the leader of the Zhou mercenaries had felt an icy cold fear within his heart. Hidden behind his stone-cold helmet was his pale face. In his mind he had felt a great deal of puzzlement. He didn't know just when the Zhou mercenaries had offended such a strong person, but without even saying a single word, this person had attacked the Zhou mercenaries ruthlessly. The leader was unable to keep calm and think about what to do, but his brain had quickly come to a conclusion. Immediately turning around, he made a decision to run away. He knew in his heart that he was completely powerless against the great display of strength shown by Jian Chen. Even if he were to stay behind, he wouldn't make much of a difference and would only die there. So if death were to be the case here, he would rather take the chance and run away. Before he could even run 20 meters away, the figure of a person quickly appeared right behind him with an extreme amount of speed. In the blink of an eye the person had already caught up with him as the silver glint of a sword left behind a brilliant glow of light as it arced toward the escaping figure. The leader of the Zhou mercenaries was a peak saint master, so the moment he felt an extraordinary amount of sword chi, he immediately ducked onto the ground and rolled away without looking backward. The moment both of his hands hit the ground, he pushed himself back up onto his feet as a long spear simultaneously appeared in his hand. With a large amount of saint force encompassing the spear, he stabbed toward Jian Chen. Jian Chen swayed slightly instead of dodging away and kept charging towards the leader once more. His arm shook as the light wind sword covered the entire area with its bright glow, causing everyone who looked at it to be dazzled at this seemingly unreal experience. Against a sword whose light seemed to encompass the entire sky, the peak Saint Master expert didn't know what he should do to protect himself. In that moment of hesitation, the silver blade of Jian Chen reappeared from within the glow and stabbed straight through his throat. Bang! Jian Chen kicked at the leader's chest, causing him to fly far backward. Holding onto his bloody light wind sword, Jian Chen ran toward the remaining Zhou mercenaries in an effort to kill them. Jian Chen had no intention of letting a single member leave this place alive. Captain Qin Yunlong has died, Captain Qin Yunlong was killed, Captain Qin Yunlong has already been killed, everybody run. The death of their captain had caused every mercenary to feel an extreme amount of fear within their hearts as everyone began to lose their fighting spirit. Against Jian Chen, who seemed like a god of death, their courage was almost non-existent. Throwing away their helmets, they began trying to escape. After Jian Chen had killed some of the members, the remaining few had all started to run away with all their strength in every possible direction. Although Jian Chen wasn't slow, killing every single mercenary in this case wouldn't be an easy task. You Zhou mercenaries won't leave this place alive. Jian Chen's eyes had a glow of killing intent behind them as he instantly began to pour out sword qi in tremendous waves from his sword. Immediately, the light wind sword separated from Jian Chen's hand as it flew out with tremendous speed. Transforming into a silver ray of light, it began to fly toward the closest mercenary in an attempt to kill him. At this moment, Jian Chen didn't care about keeping his soul sword a secret, he just wanted the entire Zhou mercenaries to be destroyed. The light wind sword shot through the air like a silver streak of light throughout the area as it stabbed through the throats of all the mercenaries who were trying to escape. In a matter of seconds the remaining 10 mercenaries had all fallen to the ground dead. Chapter 151, This one is honored. The light wind sword nimbly flew through the air as if it had a mind of its own before returning to Jian Chen's hand once more. Jian Chen held out his arm to catch the light wind sword as it flashed toward him in a silver ray of light. It was already dripping with blood, but the tip of its blade could still be seen gleaming. Just as the light wind sword returned to his hand, the blood on the blade of the sword, almost as if it was alive, began to concentrate at the sword's tip. Drop by drop it fell onto the dusty ground below as the previously bloody light wind sword became clear once more. The seemingly mirror-like metal reflected light off of the blade and radiated a hazy white glow of silver light. The forest was basked within its glow and would have dazzled the eyes of anyone that saw it. Sweeping his eyes over the mercenaries, he used his light wind sword to poke at the bodies before taking their space belts away. Carrying the space belts, he walked on over to a clean area to sit down. As he walked over, he continued to pick up the space belts of the dead Zhou mercenaries, and in a short moment, he had accumulated a small pile of space belts. After he had collected every single space belt and piled them together, Jian Chen absorbed the light wind sword back into his body. One by one, Jian Chen began to inspect the items within the space belts for the money and monster cores and letting it stack up into a single pile. In a few moments, the 40 space belts had been inspected and by Jian Chen's side, there was a small pile of monster cores and money. There were a total of 300 monster cores, most of them were Class 2 monster cores with a Class 3 monster core for every 10 Class 2 monster cores. But there wasn't a single Class 4 monster core to be seen. Half of the stack of coins in the pile were copper and silver coins, with the golden coins taking up a small amount of it to make a total of 500 coins between the three. There were around 50 purple coins, and in total, the cumulative amount of wealth from this pile would be equal to around 70 purple coins. Disliking the poor sum of money, Jian Chen stored both the monster cores and money into his own space belt. Leaving behind the dead bodies of the Zhou mercenaries along with their space belts, Jian Chen left the area. Everything that remained in their space belts was just useless junk, as every single valuable had been taken by Jian Chen. Jian Chen didn't go too far, and instead hid himself on top of a large tree. He knew that there were mercenaries trying to find him so that they could take him back to the Tianxiong clan for the reward. However, because the magical beast mountain range was so large and the terrain within so complicated, even if they were to have men every 100 meters, it would still be hard to find him. The amount of time it would take to find another group of mercenaries would be too pitiful if he were to wait elsewhere. On the mountain range, every single mercenary was still trying to get to this area. The Zhou mercenaries were the first group that had reached this place. Not too long after, from his hiding spot, Jian Chen spotted yet another group of mercenaries coming in his direction. This group only had 10 people, a vastly different amount than the previous Zhou mercenaries' numbers. However, Jian Chen could sense that this group was filled with Saint Masters. Their group strength wasn't weaker than the Zhou mercenaries at all. Just as the group of mercenaries walked under the tree Jian Chen was hiding in, he suddenly jumped down from his perch. Landing gently on the ground, he suddenly sped toward the group with the light wind sword in his hand as he stabbed forward with a tremendous amount of sword chi flowing from his blade. The 10 mercenaries had immediately reacted when Jian Chen had started his movement, but Jian Chen's speed was much faster than their reaction speed and he had already closed the gap between them. With his light wind sword, he thrust it out in a great streak of light as it stabbed into the right shoulder of one of the mercenaries. At the same time, every single one of the mercenaries had already pulled out their saint weapons as they snarled in anger. The mercenaries in the back began to run forward in hopes of trapping Jian Chen within a circle. Jian Chen pulled out his sword from the man's right shoulder and immediately put himself into a defensive position as the Saint Masters all slashed down at him. Like a silver viper, the light wind sword flashed forward toward another mercenary. The targeted mercenary hastily brought up his sword to block the strike, but with the light wind sword being so fast, his defenses were quickly overwhelmed, and he was ultimately stabbed through the right shoulder. "You're seeking death." Seeing one of their own take damage, every other mercenary became furious as even more saint force entered their saint weapons. Without mercy they continued their pursuit toward Jian Chen with their saint weapon. Jian Chen flew back 10 meters in a nimble manner, causing the sword strikes to hit nothing but air. The other remaining saint weapons crashed into the floor, causing a large crater to form. Jian Chen's right hand held his sword as the tip of it pointed downward toward the ground while his eyes stared at the mercenaries. "To dare attack us so underhandedly, you must be tired of living, you bastard." A big sturdy person cursed as he lifted his gigantic two-handed sword up to swing down at Jian Chen. "Bantu." Before that man could take a step forward, another middle-aged man came up to block him. The one named Bantu stared angrily at the one blocking him, Mu Jian. "Don't you block me, did you not see that bastard injure Hado and Eric?" The one named Mu Jian shook his head as he ignored Bantu to look at Jian Chen. "Fellow friend, I don't know what reason you might have suddenly attack us. You are here to find and capture the one called Jian Chen," Jian Chen said. Hearing this, the one named Mu Jian looked at the light wind sword in Jian Chen's hands. As if he realized something, his face underwent a huge change as he cried out, "Could you be Jian Chen then?" "That's right, I am Jian Chen." Jian Chen smiled, but it was an otherworldly type of smile. Hearing that, the 10 mercenaries looked at each other with an excited look on their faces. They didn't think that they would be able to find Jian Chen, but to find him here, if they were able to capture him, then the 10,000 purple coins reward would be theirs. However, instead of a happy look on Mu Jian's face, there was only an expression of concentration. "So you're Jian Chen, this is too, stop talking." Just as one mercenary was about to burst out into a smile and say something, Mu Jian had immediately cut him off. Glaring at him, Mu Jian turned back to Jian Chen and cupped his hands together. "I did not think honored one here would be the honored Jian Chen known for his military prowess. This one here is named Mu Jian. To be able to see the elegant and honored Jian Chen, this is truly a blessing enough for 3 lifetimes. Chapter 152. Indecision. Jian Chen laughed and spoke, "You praise me too much, honored Mu Jian truly praises me too much. I suppose your group of men entered the magical beast mountain range to find me as well. That's correct, we came to capture you. The one Mu Jian was holding back had spoken out loud. Hearing the man speak, Mu Jian's face changed before staring angrily at the man behind him. On the man's face was a look of confusion and did not understand what was happening. Mu Jian cupped his hands together as he faced Jian Chen once more and laughed. Honored Jian Chen, this one and my friends did indeed enter the magical beast mountain range, but it was to watch the excitement. We never had the idea of trying to capture the honored Jian Chen. I hope that you won't misunderstand us. Misunderstand? Jian Chen couldn't help but laugh. If I didn't hear incorrectly, then I just heard your friend over there say your group wanted to capture me. For this reason, how could I not misunderstand you? Hearing this, Mu Jian had an embarrassed look on his face. When they entered the magical beast mountain range, they really did want to capture Jian Chen. Although they had heard about Jian Chen's strength and how so many Saint Masters had died by Jian Chen's hands, they had thought it was a rumor. Every man had always mistrusted rumors, and Mu Jian and his group was no different. But the moment Mu Jian had personally seen Jian Chen's strength, he could see that none of his companions could be an opponent for Jian Chen. Even if they had the superiority in numbers, that didn't mean a guaranteed capture of Jian Chen without them taking on heavy losses as well. He was also truly aware that if Jian Chen had been serious in taking the lives of his companions, they would have long since been lying down on the ground. Because of that, Mu Jian had already given up on thinking about trying to capture Jian Chen. At this very moment, he didn't want to enter a conflict with Jian Chen, otherwise, they would take on heavy losses. Seeing the silent Mu Jian, Jian Chen spoke up once more, I don't wish to kill the innocent randomly. If you hand over all of the monster cores within your space belts, then you can purchase your life back. If you don't however, then don't blame me for being merciless. Suddenly, a glint of murderous intent made it to Jian Chen's eyes. Hearing this, every single one of the mercenaries revealed an angry yet disdainful expression. Among the 10, no one except for Mu Jian had that clear expression of understanding. Jian Chen, you're a despicable person that only knows how to use dirty tricks. What qualifications do you have to say something like that? Come and eat Uncle's sword. Jian Chen's words had angered many of the people there, and immediately, the sturdy man behind Mu Jian had brought out his giant sword in anger as he charged at Jian Chen. Hold up. Mu Jian tried to block the man without caring for the anger in his eyes. Turning around to look at Jian Chen, he spoke, Jian Chen, we became enemies by accident, could it be you're still going to force us in this way? Jian Chen began to laugh coldly, I already told you. Leave behind your monster cores, and you may go. Otherwise, I won't stay my hand. He paused for a moment before he said, however, if you make a move against me and suffer casualties, don't blame me. Jian Chen's words had left no room for argument, causing Mu Jian to feel extremely gloomy as he said, it's just as they said, everything must be given up without a word. Honored Jian Chen, you're being too excessive. One space belt was filled with the monster cores that they had risked their own lives to attain from killing magical beasts and accumulated after a long period of time. Mu Jian knew that if he were to fight with Jian Chen, then there would definitely be a loss, but at the same time, giving all of his hard-earned monster cores to Jian Chen was an impossible thing. Mu Jian, what are you doing spouting bullshit with him? Hurry up and capture him, he wants to take all of our monster cores by himself. What a huge joke that is. A golden-haired man spoke with a huge amount of disdain. Jian Chen, although you've injured 2 of our brothers, that was only because you had attacked us from behind. There's 10 of us, so that doesn't mean someone like you could be an opponent of ours. At the very most, the end result would be both sides taking on heavy injuries, but that won't be much damage to our side. On the other hand, if you take on heavy injuries, that would make things very disadvantageous for you. After all, there's many people crawling about in the magical beast mountain range who are here to capture you. To us, this isn't anything to worry about, but to you, this is a struggle between life and death, so asking for us to hand over our monster cores to you is an impossible task. The one who spoke was a sturdy person, clearly, he knew that Jian Chen's strength wasn't all that weak either. Jian Chen's eye flashed with a cold glare as he raised his light wind sword. "So it's like that, all that's left to do is fight then," he said as he charged toward the 10 people. Mu Jian didn't say anything more and held his sword. Charging with the other mercenaries, everyone prepared to fight Jian Chen. All 10 of these people had the strength of a Saint Master, and in the past, if Jian Chen were to fight against these 10 Saint Masters, he would be at a huge disadvantage. But right now, his strength was well over the level of the surrounding Saint Masters and he could handle them with ease. Using the profound steps to defend himself against the attacks from the Saint Masters and retaliating, both the mercenaries and Jian Chen were evenly matched. Despite the disadvantage Jian Chen had for being alone, not too long later, the mercenaries were slowly losing their advantage. A good amount of times the mercenaries had almost been pierced straight through their necks by Jian Chen, but they would also dodge to the side at the most crucial moment. However, they had already been stabbed multiple times by Jian Chen's sword. Jian Chen was like a demon possessed as he flashed throughout the crowd. Each time he disappeared and reappeared, he would attack from almost every direction with the light wind sword that emitted a strong amount of sword qi. The light wind sword danced as it flew through the air. The sounds of it traveling through the air could be heard clearly as it concentrated its attack in one straight line. PCH. The light wind sword's tip sharpened by the sword qi stabbed into the joint of a mercenary's right arm. At the same time, the light wind sword bore straight through his body, causing the arm to lose all functionality. That man began to shriek out in agony as the sword in his hand disappeared into thin air. His right arm had been completely skewered, causing him to lose any fighting strength he had since he could no longer hold a weapon. Bang! Jian Chen's kicked the man firmly in the abdomen, causing him to fly backward. Swaying his body to the side, he dodged another strike that came at him. At the same time, he lashed out with his sword at the man, causing him to panic. Immediately taking advantage of the hasty parry, Jian Chen immediately stabbed him through the right shoulder. Chapter 153, Meeting another great Saint Master. The injury to the right shoulder had impacted the man's ability to swing his sword. The man who was struck through the shoulder had felt an injury so grave that it was beyond anything he had ever felt. Because of the sword qi enhanced sword tip, when the light wind sword stabbed through his right shoulder, his entire right arm had lost functionality as well as fighting ability. The injured members could only helplessly retreat while Jian Chen advanced forward to fight the other mercenaries. The sounds of Saint weapon clashing against Saint weapon could be heard constantly as the Saint force from everyone mixed in with everyone else's. The Saint force had even reached a point where the nearby grass was flattened while the dirt from the ground flew up in one giant dust cloud, covering everyone's figure. Every so often the miserable sounds of pain could be heard as yet another person was kicked into the air. Each figure was soaked with blood and had injuries all over their bodies. Not too long later, the previously 10 mercenaries had been reduced down to a small handful. Jian Chen's figure had been constantly slashing at his opponents in a fierce manner, but there was not even a single wound to be seen anywhere on his body. Blocking the downward slash of a sword, Jian Chen's light wind sword streaked forward and stabbed into the right shoulder of another mercenary. "I don't wish to slaughter the innocent, so I'll give you one last chance to go. If you remain stubborn like this, then don't blame me anymore." Jian Chen called out without any emotion, but it could be seen that there was a killing intent within his eyes. He had been very lenient until now, but because they were so stubborn, he had no choice but to kill them. This was a very common thing on the Tianyuan continent, so Jian Chen didn't think he was at fault. After all, this world obeyed the primal laws of the jungle, and so the strong held all of the power. The weak would never have any say in this world. If any mercenary were to come into the magical beast mountain range, they were there just to capture Jian Chen and bring him back to the Tianxiong clan for the bounty, and these 10 mercenaries in front of him were no different. If it weren't for the fact that Jian Chen was stronger than them, these mercenaries wouldn't have been so unwilling to fight him at first. Hearing this, the The one called Mu Jian revealed the struggle he was having within his mind as he looked at his heavily injured and weakened mercenaries. Biting his lip, he finally yelled out, "Stop!" Mu Jian didn't have a weak amount of prestige among this group of mercenaries. The moment he had spoken, every single mercenary had immediately jumped backward and looked with fear at Jian Chen and his slender light-wind sword. His sword was so fast that it had caused even them to be extremely afraid. During their battle with Jian Chen, there were many times that the light-wind sword had almost struck them, only to be saved by their nearby comrades at the very last moment. Mu Jian continued to look at Jian Chen with a complicated look, but seeing the amount of blood that was leaking down from his light-wind sword, he suddenly became dejected and said helplessly, "Everyone take out your monster cores. Honored Jian Chen has already been merciful toward us. If we don't follow his demands this time, then simple injuries won't be the end of our problems." This time, none of the mercenaries had any thoughts of disagreeing. With a dejected look on their faces, they silently began to pull out all of their remaining monster cores from their space belts and piled them up on the ground. After that short exchange, they all knew that even with 10 people, they were not enough to be classified as an opponent for this youth. With his extremely fast sword strokes and ability to defend so quickly, they simply had no way of attacking or resisting. These 10 Saint Masters had many monster cores on them. Although they didn't have many Class 3 monster cores, they still had plenty of Class 2 monster cores. "Jian Chen, this is all of the monster cores we have, that means we can go now, correct?" Mu Jian spoke with an ugly expression. Jian Chen looked at the pile of monster cores on the ground with an involuntary smile on his face. If you had just given the monster cores earlier, then all of this could have been avoided. "That's fine, although I, Jian Chen, cannot call myself a gentleman, I am a man who keeps his promises. You can go." Mu Jian spared one last look at the small pile of monster cores on the ground, a look of reluctance. With a helpless sigh, Mu Jian and his friends could only leave this place behind. Although the pile of monster cores wasn't a lot relatively speaking, it was all the Saint Masters had. "Remember, I don't wish to see you come and face me again, otherwise, I will definitely not be as merciful. You would best do to leave the magical beast mountain range immediately." As the 10 mercenaries walked away, Jian Chen had called out to them before they could get too far. Hearing this, Mu Jian had stopped for only a second, but he didn't say anything. Quickly after, he disappeared into the forest. Jian Chen recollected his light-wind sword and calmly walked toward the pile of monster cores. Bending down to store all of it into his personal space belt, he had counted that there were around 200 monster cores. A good amount of the cores were Class 2, but there were around 20 Class 3 monster cores. Just as Jian Chen had finished cleaning up all of the monster cores, he slowly straightened his back and gave a cold smile. "Fellow friend, you've been here for some time and seen quite enough. Isn't it time for you to come out?" "Ha ha ha ha." Just as Jian Chen finished talking, a loud voice came out from the forest. Afterward, a gray shadow flew out from within and landed 20 meters away from where Jian Chen stood. The person who came was rather old, his age was around 50 to 60 years old. His face was rather red as he looked at Jian Chen with a lively expression. Judging by how disorderly his silver hair was, the man was rather unconventional with his looks. He wore a gray robe and was taller than Jian Chen by a large amount, and even though he was standing on the ground with no unusual posture, Jian Chen could feel an indomitable pressure enshrouding him. Seeing this elder, Jian Chen couldn't help but heighten his guard as his face grew more serious. Staring deeply at the elder, he spoke 3 words, "Great Saint Master." The elder laughed, "Little baby, I didn't think you'd be able to tell this old man's strength. Not bad, not bad. Truly not bad. It would appear you have some strength, it is no wonder that old bastard Tianxiong Lai wasn't able to capture you." Chapter 154, Killing a Great Saint Master, Part 1, Jian Chen sucked in a deep breath. Although he had long since guessed that the chances of a great Saint Master coming after him for the 10,000 purple coins were quite large, he didn't think it'd be so soon. There was no fear within Jian Chen's heart, although he couldn't say for sure that he could win against a great Saint Master expert. He had confidence that he could at least fight against one to some degree. At the same time, Jian Chen was also secretly rejoicing. He was rejoicing his foresight that had told him to first cultivate until he was a Saint Master. If he hadn't, then if he were to come across a great Saint Master, he would have no choice but to try and escape. Against this elderly great Saint Master, Jian Chen had felt a huge amount of pressure. Quickly, he had calmed himself down and stared at the elder with a barely calm expression. "Dear elder, could it be that you were also enticed by the 10,000 purple coins for my capture?" The baby asks a question he already knows the answer to. "This old one won't spare any talk with you. Come along with me quietly, or I'll do it myself. You must have realized by now that I am not like the previous 10 Saint Masters you just fought." The elder casually looked at Jian Chen, but he did not see Jian Chen as an opponent. Jian Chen let out a sneer as the light wind sword reappeared within his right hand. As he grasped the hilt of the sword, the tip dragged against the ground as he spoke. "Waiting to be captured and delivered was never my style. Dear elder, this one thanks you for your smart idea." Suddenly, Jian Chen disappeared into a blur with only the smallest of traces of his figure as he flew toward the elder. In a split second, the 20-meter gap between the two was quickly closed as the light wind sword began to emit a strong amount of sword qi and stabbed at the elder's throat. The careless expression on the elder's face was gone in an instant and was replaced by a serious one. His palm began to envelop with a strong amount of saint force before condensing into a foot-long dagger. In the elder's hands, it shone coldly as it greeted the light wind sword's approach. The light wind sword and the elder's dagger collided against each other with a large sound. Immediately a large wave of saint force emerged in waves from the impact and spread out in a circle around them in a manner that was noticeable to the naked eye. As it rippled away from the two fighters, the surrounding grass was immediately flattened as the wave of saint force rippled over it. It had even kicked up a dust cloud from the ground and immediately caused visibility to be lowered. A slight hum could be heard from Jian Chen's throat as he was forced to fly back a few meters. For every step, a deep imprint could be seen in the dirt. The strength of a great Saint Master is indeed very strong. I didn't think that even after making a breakthrough to the Saint Master level, there would still be such a wide gap between the two. Jian Chen muttered. With this current exchange with the elder, it was Jian Chen who had been at a disadvantage. After all, in a battle of strength with Saint Force, how could Jian Chen who was only at the Saint Master stage contend against the elder who was at the great Saint Master? Yet, Jian Chen was also secretly delighted. After making contact with the elder, he had realized just how wide that gap in strength was, and how close he was to the elder's level, making him quite happy. On the other side, the elder's face grew even more serious as he looked at Jian Chen and spoke solemnly. "The baby here seems to be quite complicated. It seems that if this old one wants to capture you, then this old one better put in more effort." Jian Chen's face carried a cold smile. "Even if you do everything you can, you won't be able to capture me." The elder laughed with a chilling smile. "The baby knows how to talk big, then allow this old one to observe and see just how strong you are." After he had finished speaking, the elder's dagger exploded with saint force. Following that explosion of energy, the elder suddenly disappeared and then abruptly reappeared right in front of Jian Chen with his dagger ready to pierce through Jian Chen's heart. Because the elder was a great Saint Master, Jian Chen didn't dare lower his concentration. The saint force within his body began to circulate and gather around the light wind sword within his right hand. Forming a white haze of sword qi over the blade, Jian Chen swung his sword at the incoming dagger. Suddenly, another explosion of energy could be seen as the shockwave was sent throughout the area. The dirt on the ground was sent flying into the air as the clash of saint force immediately pressed against the ground. Countless plants were uprooted and sent into the air. In one strike, Jian Chen was once again sent flying back a few steps while the elder was once again unaffected and instead chased after the retreating Jian Chen with his dagger aimed at Jian Chen's heart. Jian Chen's body shifted to the side, causing the dagger to harmlessly slice past his clothes. After, the light wind sword chi enshrouded the elder within, and in a split second, he had lashed out 10 times with each sword stroke aimed at various parts of the elder's body. The elder brought back his dagger and brandished it in front of him, defending himself against the various strikes. Ding 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 ding, the sounds of the weapons clashing together could be heard as the light wind sword and dagger continuously hit each other in a split second. Suddenly, the elder retreated fiercely as the robe he was wearing was no longer in a completely intact state. On his chests there were a few scars that were leaking blood. From the other parts of his robes, a few strands and patches were already falling down to the ground. Even on top of his head, a few strands of his hair could be seen drifting in the wind after being cut. Right in front of him, Jian Chen did not look to be in a better state. Although there wasn't any injuries on his body, his face was a morbidly pale shade. Seeing how his clothes had been ripped apart in such a manner, the elder looked at Jian Chen with a calculating look. You really can't see a favor when it comes, don't blame me when I don't show mercy then. Jian Chen only laughed. Many Saint Masters have died by my sword, but never could I claim to have killed a great Saint Master with my light wind sword. Today, you shall be the first. How arrogant! The elder snarled as he sped toward Jian Chen without any further words to be said. Chapter 155, Killing a Great Saint Master, 2. Without any fear, Jian Chen charged forward with his light wind sword and once more clashed fiercely with the elder. This time, Jian Chen had used his entire strength and profound steps to clash against the elder. Using his light wind sword to stab at the elder continuously, he simultaneously dodged each and every strike from his opponent. From the beginning of this new round, he had avoided clashing his weapon with the elder's, and it was only when it was impossible to dodge that he used his sword to defend. The elder's control over his dagger was superb, and it was almost as if he had reached the absolute pinnacle with his weapon. Almost as if each strike was an act of perfection, the dagger always flew straight toward Jian Chen's heart. The two fighters traveled back and forth throughout the area, their movements had kicked up a strong breeze. Already, the breeze was starting to become a strong gale that threatened to uproot the surrounding grass and send it flying into the air. The two continued to go at each other, but under the fine control of Jian Chen, his own saint weapon had rarely crashed against the elder's dagger. With each passing moment, the elder was getting more and more depressed. He was feeling a deep pit of anger within himself. His strength was clearly higher than that of his opponent, but because his opponent had the slight advantage in speed and also boasted a superior reaction time, there were plenty of times when the elder was unable to find a solution to do anything. There were also many times where even with his Saint Master strength, the terrifyingly fast speed of the sword had left the elder at a critical junction between life and death. Little baby, you call yourself a male yet you fight an elderly person without hesitation to such a degree. Just what point is there to that? The elder barked out with anger as he couldn't handle this battle any longer. Hearing this, Jian Chen had a small smile on his face. To try to get an easy and short merit, this was an unwise choice. Do you think I am that foolish? The elder was temporarily stunned without saying a word. A flash of killing intent quickly passed through his eyes as he quickly leaped toward Jian Chen once more with his dagger ready to kill him. Knowing that the elder no longer had any idea of letting him live, Jian Chen's eyes flashed with a tint of coldness before increasing his speed by a notch. The amount of sword qi in the air intensified and looked as if the entire area was covered within its shroud, which made it almost impossible for the two to find each other. With the increased amount of strength on Jian Chen's part, the amount of pressure on the elder was increased many times over. Despite being a great Saint Master with a good amount of speed, he was unable to match Jian Chen in almost any aspect and was constantly put in a state of panic. Whoosh! At the same time, a sword qi sharpened blade came out of the mist abruptly. The elder simply had no time to react, and so the sharp sword immediately cut through his right arm at the wrist. The pain from losing his right hand caused the elder to be stunned. Yet while he was stunned, the light wind sword had quickly flashed toward the elder's figure. The elder quickly held his dagger in his other hand in front of him to act as a form of defense as he tried to retreat backward. Suddenly, Before he could get far, the elder came to a screeching halt as a bloody sword stabbed straight through his throat and protruded underneath his chin. He didn't know how or when Jian Chen had gotten behind him, only that his light wind sword had already stabbed straight through his throat, landing a killing blow. The elder's dazed eyes viewed the sword in his throat with a look of pure disbelief. He was utterly confused on how Jian Chen could sneak behind him without him noticing. Yet, the questions the elder had would never be answered as his body slowly locked up and fell to the ground. Both of his eyes grew wide and clouded over as a sign of death. Jian Chen pulled out his sword with a breath of air escaping from his lips. Fighting this great Saint Master had cost him a large amount of his energy, and after this fight, he was starting to breathe heavily. Absorbing his light wind sword into his body once more, he looked at the elderly figure on the floor. With a small sigh, he muttered, "To have dozens of years of cultivation destroyed in a single day, AI, there was no need for that. If only you didn't have greed seduce your heart into attacking me, you wouldn't have ended up like that." With that said, Jian Chen bent over to pick up the space belt on the elder and began to take out every item from within. The amount of monster cores within the elder's space belt didn't number more than the amount Jian Chen had, only having around 50 monster cores in total. However, the lowest ranked monster core was a Class 2 monster core. There was not a single Class 1 monster core in sight. Over half were Class 2 monster cores and 20 Class 3 monster cores. There was also a single Class 4 monster core. Aside from the monster cores, Jian Chen also counted around 70 purple coins worth of money. After storing the monster cores and purple coins within his space belt, Jian Chen turned over the space belt within his hand once more before realizing there was a piece of white fur within it. This piece of white fur was about the size of his palm. It was soft to touch and seemed extremely cozy to hold. There was also a warm sensation to it. This piece of fur, Jian Chen stared at the fur in his hand with some shock. Immediately throwing the space belt to the ground, he dove into his own space ring from within his space belt and took out a red embroidered pouch. This red pouch was the memento and family heirloom of the Bai clan that was handed down to him from his mother Bai Yuntian. Jian Chen's fingers nimbly opened up the pouch to take out the piece of white fur from within. His hands began to shake as he unfolded the piece of fur, only to see that the one from within the red pouch was also the size of his palm. As Jian Chen compared the two pieces of fur closely, his eyes widened more and more in shock. That was because these two pieces of fur were almost identical, even the texture of the fur was the same. From the looks of things, it was almost as if the two pieces of fur came from one single piece that was cut into multiple parts. Jian Chen's eyes looked back to the elder's resting body once more as his heart began to beat. The piece of fur from within the red pouch was the family heirloom of the Bai clan. To this day, the heirloom must have been well over 100 years old, and although he didn't know what use this piece of fur was for, the antiquity and price for it was clearly self-evident. To be treasured by the Bai clan whose accumulated strength had been wiped out in a single night, it was simple to see that this piece of fur would surely have a high price. At this moment, to unexpectedly find an identical piece of fur from this great saint master of an elder, Jian Chen couldn't help but wonder who this elder was. Chapter 156, Fearsome Reputation and Profit. Why did this elder have this piece of fur on him? Just who was he? Jian Chen held the piece of fur in his hand as he contemplated this question. Perhaps he gained this piece of fur by coincidence. However, just what secret is this piece of fur hiding? Jian Chen muttered under his breath. He had accidentally found this piece of fur from the elder and thus had been tempted by this strange and curious new find. Could this be a type of treasure map with some sort of amazing martial arts written on it? Jian Chen pondered. Based on his previous experience from his past life, he quickly conjured up a few speculations. However, this piece of fur didn't have a single trace of impurity to it. There were absolutely no connections to be drawn to it. It appeared to be unrelated to a treasure map or any sort of unique martial art. Many times in the past did Jian Chen take out the piece of fur to study it. Under his eyes and hands, the fur was strong and flexible, and no matter how much strength he used, not a single strand of fur could be pulled from it. It wasn't like a normal piece of fur, so if there was a secret hidden within the fur, Jian Chen was utterly clueless. Forget it, it's best to forget about this for now. There'll be another time in the future for me to find out the secrets of this mysterious piece of fur. Pushing his curiosity away, Jian Chen placed the piece of fur back into the red pouch along with the piece from the elder back into his space ring. The space ring was then placed back into his space belt as well. Since Jian Chen wasn't able to figure out the mystery behind the pieces of fur, he didn't want to expend any additional mental energy to stay in such a place to find out more about it. Soon after, the elder's space belt was rummaged through once more. Finally, with one last look, Jian Chen didn't find any other valuable treasure, so he tossed it aside. Dusting his hands, Jian Chen left the area without another look back. After another few days, Jian Chen continued to find and capture any mercenary group that came across him. The amount of monster cores on him could be said to number up to a high amount, and whenever he saw a group of mercenaries he found interesting, he would let them go. For those who weren't pleasing to talk to, he would kill them. In those few days, the amount of mercenaries killed by Jian Chen couldn't be counted, and the amount of bodies that littered the magical beast mountain range was enormous. The scent of blood and death wafted throughout the mountain range, almost as if the scent of blood covered the entire area like an ocean. It went without saying that many people were tempted by the 10,000 purple coin reward by the Tianxiong clan. This time, there were many Saint Master experts within the mountain range along with a few strong great Saint Masters. Excluding the dagger-wielding elder Jian Chen had first met, there were another 4 great Saint Masters that he had come across. There were even 2 great Saint Masters that had come across Jian Chen along with 30 great saints and Saint Master experts. That particular battle was extremely fierce. In the end, Jian Chen had expended a Herculean amount of strength in order to kill those 2 great Saint Masters, and many of the other great saints and Saint Masters were killed off by Jian Chen. Jian Chen paid for the battle by having various wounds inflicted onto his body, and when a good amount of mercenaries had fled from him, Jian Chen was powerless to chase after them. Since Jian Chen could use the light saint force in the same way a radiant saint master could, he wasn't afraid of any injury, and so the numerous injuries on his body were healed without a single trace in less than 2 hours. Although the battle was extremely fierce, Jian Chen had gained an equally abundant reward. The 2 great Saint Masters had a total of 100 monster cores. There were very few Class 2 monster cores and a very large amount of Class 3 monster cores. There had even been 2 Class 4 monster cores stashed within. Although the amount of monster cores he had collected from the 2 great Saint Masters was a large quantity, the great Saint and Saint Master mercenaries accompanying the 2 only had a total of 30 monster cores. They must have belonged to the same mercenary group and given the majority of their monster cores to the 2 great Saint Masters. Another great Saint Masters he encountered didn't have any Class 4 monster cores, but he did have a decent amount of Class 3 monster cores. In comparison to the first encounter, there was only 20 Class 3 monster cores and 30 Class 2 monster cores. The last great Saint Master he met was extremely wretched. Jian Chen had only been able to collect 5 Class 3 monster cores and a single Class 2 monster core. Although he was a great Saint Master, he might as well be considered an experienced Saint Master. Now after Jian Chen's breakthrough to the Saint Master level, his fighting ability had been enhanced. Against a great Saint Master expert, he already had the capabilities to kill them, as long as he didn't come across a peak great Saint Master or one with an attributed Saint force. Jian Chen wouldn't need to fear the consequences of fighting against one. After these few days of killing mercenaries, aside from the 2 great Saint Masters who had inflicted many injuries on him, Jian Chen hadn't been too heavily injured against anyone else. After this indiscriminate massacre, Jian Chen's fearful name had spread far and wide to even beyond the mountain range where many mercenaries had started to spread the news even farther away. By this point, Wake City wasn't the only area that had knowledge of Jian Chen, even the surrounding cities knew of Jian Chen's terrifying name. Hearing the rumors flying about, many mercenaries still traveled from afar to the magical Beast Mountain range. Many mercenaries that wanted to capture Jian Chen gradually renounced their efforts. Every day many cowardly mercenaries could be seen retreating from the mountain range and abandoning the hunt. Despite having many mercenaries retreat from the mountain range, there were still many stronger mercenary groups that stayed within the area. After the weaker mercenaries left, there weren't many people left in comparison to when the hunt had begun, but all of the remaining members were of the Saint Master level at the very least. After a large amount of mercenaries had left the Magical Beast Mountain Range, the area had become peaceful once more compared to the chaotic atmosphere when everyone had wanted to capture Jian Chen. Even the mercenaries that were originally there to hunt and kill magical beasts for their monster cores were driven out from the area to avoid any trouble. Now that there were even less people than before, Jian Chen took the initiative instead of staying passive to find the remaining mercenaries. Regarding those mercenaries he found, he still used the same philosophy he always had. If they were to hand over their monster cores, then he would let them go without any harm without exception, but for those too stubborn to listen and still wanted to capture him, Jian Chen would kill them without exception. Within the cloudless sky, the fierce sun loomed overhead with its brilliant rays of light stabbing into the earth below almost as if it were putting a golden-colored carpet over it. Because of the recent summer weather, the sun had been unbearably hot. In the lush forests of the Magical Beast Mountain Range, it was almost like an isolated piece of the world. There were trees in every direction of the forest that blotted out the sun and its light. Every so often, the tree leaves would sway in the wind along with the tall grass underneath. While the outside area was hot, the forest within the Magical Beast Mountain Range was rather cool. Somewhere within the mountain range, 10 mercenaries sat in a circle with a bonfire in the center. Spiked on top of the fire were a few pieces of magical beast meat that slowly caramelized and dripped their juices into the fire below with the occasional sizzling sound. Although these 10 mercenaries were sitting down, their height and stature weren't hidden at all. Each one of them wore a thin layer of animal leather that had a few scratches from the thorns and thistles of the forest. "Captain, there's been many mercenaries that have left the mountain range with not many people left. At the same time, Jian Chen's strength has far surpassed our expectations. Just a few days ago I heard that a few great Saint Masters died by his hands as well. I think it would be for the best that we give up on this mission," one of the mercenaries said. Table of Contents. Chapter 157, Should we? Just as this one mercenary finished talking, another spoke up, "That's right, Captain. Although we haven't come across Jian Chen yet, on the road we've already seen over 100 corpses. After a closer look, most of them appear to be close friends within Wake City who are all above the Saint Master level. If Jian Chen can kill a group of Saint Master experts, then his own strength should be that of a great Saint Master at the very least. Even if we were to face off against him, it's not guaranteed that we'll capture him without any losses or serious casualties. I'm afraid that even our complete destruction might be a possible outcome." Hearing that mercenary, the other 10 mercenaries couldn't help but have serious expressions on their faces. This newfound information had sent their heads into a whirl as they realized that if they wanted to capture Jian Chen alive with their middle Saint Master strength, they would need more effort than they had thought. After all, with their formation, they were capable of going up against a great Saint Master, and the news given to them by the Tianxiong clan explicitly said that Jian Chen had only great saint strength. At the very best he would be at the Saint Master level, so at the very beginning, they hadn't bothered to take Jian Chen seriously. However, now that they had been wandering within the Magical Beast Mountain Range for a few days, news of Jian Chen's amazing prowess had reached their ears about how multiple great Saint Masters had died by his hand. Although they didn't believe these rumors at first, after seeing corpses litter the ground wherever they went had shaken their confidence. Right now, these 10 mercenaries were in an awkward position where it was difficult to call off the hunt. They wanted to capture Jian Chen, but at the same time, they worried about going against him. They wanted to retreat from the mountain range, but they were also unwilling to give up the 10,000 purple coin reward that had so enticingly tempted their hearts. "Captain, we should give up this mission. The fact that we've seen so many bodies on our paths is proof of Jian Chen's might. If we were to come across Jian Chen even with our numbers, we would still not be considered his opponent and would undoubtedly have many people die by his hands. A scarred middle-aged man spoke with fear prevalent in his eyes. I second Yun Jibing's suggestion. Captain, while 10,000 purple coins isn't a small amount by any means, but it can't be spent if we're dead. If we die here, there isn't any point to money or enjoying any other worldly pleasure. Another tanned person spoke. Hearing these mercenaries speak up, a mercenary with a knife wound slowly nodded his head and said, "Fine then, let us get off of this mountain range." With that announcement, every other mercenary let out a breath of air in relief as the tense expressions on their faces loosened up a bit. It's a shame that you cannot walk in the night. Suddenly, a moment after the mercenaries were happily rejoicing, another voice was heard. The new arrival of the voice had caused every mercenary to stiffen. "Who's there? Come out." The scarred mercenary called out as he stood up. At the same time, the other 10 mercenaries slowly stood up as well, staring cautiously at the dangerous area around them. Suddenly, a leather-wearing person slowly came walking out from behind the trees. This person had long black hair with a piece of tall grass keeping it in place. There were stains all over his skin as he walked forward, but no one could distinguish who he was. The 10 mercenaries collectively looked at this animal hide-wearing person as the knife-scarred mercenary yelled out, "Who are you?" The animal hide-wearing person began to smile with the shadows of the night still covering the rest of his facial features, but the smile could be seen clearly. "I'm the person you're looking for." Bewildered, not a single mercenary could react to this announcement besides having their faces pale abruptly. You, could you be that Jian Chen?" A man stuttered out. There was an expression of utter panic that had overtaken his face. The animal hide-wearing person nodded his head slowly with a smile, "That's right, I am Jian Chen." There was a miraculous expression on the mercenaries' face as they looked at Jian Chen, who stared right back at them. None of them had thought that the person they had been looking for all this time would suddenly appear right in front of them just as they had decided to retreat from the magical beast mountain range. If Jian Chen appeared a few days ago, these 10 mercenaries would have been overjoyed to see him and wouldn't have any hesitation. But now, at this moment, there was a wave of agony that smashed into their hearts. "Hand over all of the monster cores in your possession and you may leave. Otherwise, you will die here. I'll give you a few moments to consider your options." Jian Chen spoke out. His tone was unnaturally calm, but when these mercenaries heard him speak, their hearts all grew heavy. The 10 mercenaries looked at each other as the leader spoke up, "Honored Jian Chen, the moment you opened your mouth, you wanted us to give up our monster cores, isn't that too much? After all, these monster cores were earned after so much hard work and risking our lives in order to get even just one more monster core," he said with an unwillingness. Right after hearing the rumors of Jian Chen killing multiple great Saint Master experts, the leader had given up on seeing Jian Chen as an enemy. Jian Chen laughed, "I don't care for that. Your time is up now. If you don't hand over your monster cores, then don't blame me for what happens next." Hearing this, the 10 mercenaries all grew unhappy. The leader hesitated for merely a moment before striding forward, "Honored Jian Chen, if you can defeat me within 5 moves, then I will hand over our monster cores. Otherwise, we will just end up in a complete stalemate." Jian Chen's eyes flashed dangerously for a moment as he looked at the leader. "Fine, I'll defeat you in 5 moves then." In an instant, an intense amount of saint force appeared within his hand as a silver sword materialized. Everyone moved back. The middle-aged man waved his own saint weapon, ready to slash at Jian Chen with the might of his two-handed sword. Chapter 158. 3 moves. Seeing Jian Chen and their leader brandishing their weapons, the other mercenaries began to move back to watch the two fight. The scarred mercenary clenched onto his saint weapon as he stared firmly at Jian Chen. His face was unnaturally serious. Whether or not he would be able to keep his monster cores would be determined by this battle. Although it was impossible for a great Saint Master to defeat a peak Saint Master in 5 moves, Jian Chen's agreement to this duel had refreshed the mercenary's courage. With no hesitation in his step, he was motivated to try and accomplish the task. For this middle-aged man, the amount of pressure on him was tremendous. Alas, there was still a small amount of worry within his heart. With Jian Chen's simple agreement to this duel, would he try and eliminate him given an opportunity? Knowing this possibility, he still didn't dare to voice out his thoughts. He would just have to try it. While it was true he wanted to save his monster cores, he also wanted to test out Jian Chen's strength. Seeing how young he was, he didn't know how he could be as strong as the rumors said. Just how could someone who was barely over 20 years old kill a great Saint Master expert? The leader's face hardened into a serious expression while Jian Chen smiled and extended his hand. Come. Sparing any politeness, the saint force around the mercenary's great sword exploded with intensity as he charged toward Jian Chen. Jian Chen's body disappeared into a blur as he rushed toward the man with his light wind sword ready to stab at him in a brilliant gleam of silver light. Seeing Jian Chen's sword disappear, the mercenary's pupils contracted in surprise as he suddenly whipped his great sword down to where he thought the light wind sword would appear. Ding! The sound of steel striking against steel could be heard as the two saint weapons were entangled together in a fierce stalemate. A wave of saint force exploded out from the swords and swept over the area like a galestorm. Just as the saint weapons collided with each other, the mercenary's face began to change as his eyes widened in shock. The seemingly slender and thin sword contained such a disproportionate amount of saint force, causing his giant sword to tremble and his arms to go numb. To end up in a deadlock against me with such a slim one-handed sword, it would appear the rumors were not as empty as I thought. The mercenary muttered under his breath. Just as the mercenary was thinking to himself, the second strike was already coming at a faster pace than the first one. Becoming even more serious than before, the mercenary was barely given enough time to react to Jian Chen's sword. Trying to resist the numb sensation within his arms, he raised his sword horizontally to block the light wind sword. The moment the light wind sword stabbed into the great sword, an incredible amount of power was transmitted through the sword into the mercenary behind it, who was forced a few steps back. As for the sword in his hands, it had started to tremble and shake under the pressure. You've already lost. Just as the mercenary finally regained his stability, another voice came from behind. Whipping around, the man's face grew pale and sweat began to gather on his forehead as he saw what was behind him. Pointing right behind him was an amazingly thin sword that was only centimeters away from his body. The tip of that sword was already pointing straight at his throat. The man's face grew sluggish as he looked at the sword threatening to pierce his throat in disbelief. There was just simply no words he could say. At this sudden reveal, the other 10 mercenaries behind the two fighters also looked on in disbelief. Their eyes revealed a sluggish look as they saw the sword calmly pointing at their leader's neck. Not a single of them had anything to say. This is the third move, you've lost. Taking back the light wind sword, Jian Chen looked at the mercenary with a calm face. 3 moves. Jian Chen had only used 3 moves to defeat a peak saint master. The leader quickly looked at Jian Chen with a fearful face. Swallowing, his voice began to stutter as he said, what fa? Fast sword. Jian Chen gave a faint laugh. You should know what to do right about now. The fear in the leader's eyes quickly calmed down as he looked at Jian Chen. Although Jian Chen was completely covered by filth, the mercenary could see how young Jian Chen really was. The man absorbed his sword back into his body and cupped his hands together. I thank Honored One for his mercy. Then turning to walk back to the other mercenaries, he spoke out in a low voice, everyone take out all your monster cores. Hearing this, the mercenaries all hesitated for a moment before accepting this outcome. The 10 pulled the monster cores within their space belt one by one. After watching their leader fight with Jian Chen, they understood that he only wanted their monster cores. Not killing them was already a huge favor granted to them, and if they didn't hand over the monster cores, with Jian Chen's strength, their entire mercenary group would be slaughtered. If their own leader, who was the strongest of them all, couldn't even withstand 5 moves from Jian Chen, then they had no chance. The scarred mercenary took out a bag from within his space belt and began to place all of the monster cores he had in that bag. Then without any command from Jian Chen, he immediately began to take the other mercenaries' monster cores and collected them into the bag. In the end, he presented the bag to Jian Chen with a lingering gaze and said, "In that bag are all the monster cores we have." This bag of monster cores had around 100 inside. Around half of them were Class 3 monster cores and the rest were Class 2 monster cores with barely any Class 1 monster cores. Jian Chen took the bag into his own hands into his space belt and said, "I, Jian Chen, abide by my promises. You are free to go." Without any further words, the scarred mercenary led the other mercenaries away from the area. Seeing the group disappear into the horizon, Jian Chen let out a breath of air. Leaning carelessly against a tree next to him, he muttered, "These past few days have been so repetitive. However, despite it being so tiring, I've earned quite a lot. The amount of monster cores I've earned should be enough to last my cultivation needs for a very long time. I don't even know if I should thank the Tianxiong clan or hate them." After taking a small break, Jian Chen stood back up and said, "Right now there's practically no one left in the Magical Beast Mountain range. With such a huge area to search, I'm far too lazy to look in each zone. Forget it, I've already got enough monster cores. I'll let the rest go and cultivate my strength in the meantime. Otherwise, if I were to come across multiple great Saint Masters at once, I doubt I'll be an opponent for them." Chapter 159, A Breakthrough in Strength. Afterward, Jian Chen found a river based on his memories, and washed away all the filth on his body. He then took out and then put on a new set of clothes from his space belt. He had been wearing crude clothes put together from animal skins for quite a long time, so when he put on soft, cloth clothing, a comfortable feeling instantly spread throughout his body. Jian Chen seemed to revel in the warm feeling the cloth gave off as he smoothed it over his body. In that instant, his mental state that had been so tightly wound the past few days finally relaxed. After that, Jian Chen killed a magical beast in the forest and tore off a large and fatty hind leg. He then found a dry spot on the ground to build a fire and began to slowly roast the meat. After filling his empty stomach, Jian Chen began to count the profits from the past few days. When Jian Chen took out all of the monster cores in his space belt and placed them on the ground, they formed a pile that was around 1 meter high. Such a large amount of monster cores gathered together began to glow, as the hidden surges of power within each of them began to resonate with each other. Seeing this, Jian Chen's heart began to race. Roughly calculating, Jian Chen concluded that this pile had at least 2,000 monster cores. As for the exact number, it would be impossible to guess an accurate value without carefully flipping through them. After all, the power of a monster core was not related to any other factors. Looking at the plentiful monster cores, Jian Chen couldn't help but smile in excitement. The rewards from the past few days were really abundant, to the point where it was hard to believe. Such a large amount of monster cores was enough for Jian Chen to cultivate for quite a while. With an excited mood, Jian Chen took out the 3 space belts and threw them to the side. These few space belts had all been specifically taken from those mercenaries in preparation for this future occasion. Soon after, Jian Chen began to separate the monster cores from each other. After 4 hours, Jian Chen had finally organized the large mass of various monsters' cores. There were now 3 piles in front of him, 1 each for Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3. There are a total of around 700 Class 1 monster cores, 900 Class 2 monster cores, and 600 Class 3 monster cores. I hadn't imagined that I'd gain about 2,300 monster cores these past few days. This is really much better than I anticipated. It seems I must really thank the Tianxiong clan. I must thank them for the great opportunity they gave me. Jian Chen laughed to himself when he saw all of the monster cores. Jian Chen then placed each group of monster cores into a different space belt. He then returned to the cave that he had been living in for a while. After covering up the entrance, he resumed cultivating. The cave was so dark that he couldn't even see his own hand. Jian Chen sat there cross-legged, like an unmoving sculpture. If it weren't for the faint sound of him breathing, people might have really mistaken him for a living statue. As Jian Chen continued to absorb the energy from within the monster cores, the saint force within him was constantly growing stronger. After becoming a saint master, the demand required for cultivation not only increased, but Jian Chen's absorption speed had also doubled. Before becoming a great saint, he needed to consume 3 Class 3 monster cores in a single night, which meant that he consumed almost 10 Class 3 monster cores for a day of cultivating without stopping. Now that his absorption speed was faster, the amount of monster cores that Jian Chen would need to absorb in a night was 6 to 7. Based on this, he'd end up consuming around 20 Class 3 monster cores in a day. Although the amount of Class 3 monster cores he had to consume was a frightening number, Jian Chen wasn't concerned at all about a lack of monster cores. Not only did he have hundreds of Class 3 monster cores in his space belt, he was also in the magical beast mountain range. He could enter the deeper regions and kill Class 4 magical beasts any time he wanted to. Class 4 monster cores contained enormous amounts of energy, and far surpassed that of Class 3 monster cores. In the outside world, Jian Chen's name, as well as everything he had done in the magical beast mountain range, was currently being spread everywhere. As this was happening, Jian Chen was sitting cross-legged within the dark cave, diligently raising his strength. Time quickly passed. In the blink of an eye, a year had already passed. Within this year, the commotion that Jian Chen had caused in the outside world had gradually settled. Wake City had long since recovered to its original ways. There wasn't that big of a difference between now and a year ago. The only difference was that the Wake City's Tianxiong clan had died out. Deep within the magical beast mountain range, there were no signs of people. Class 4 magical beasts roamed about the area as they pleased, and it wasn't an area that anyone could just walk around. In this area, one could go for half a month without seeing any trace of a human. This was an extremely common occurrence. This moment, a green-black mist was slowly rising nearby. The scent of roasted meat was blown through the air by the breeze, gradually diffusing it in all directions. The figure of a cotton-wearing youth could be seen sitting cross-legged with a bonfire right in front of him that burned brightly as a piece of magical beast meat was cooked over the flames. This youth looked no older than 20 years old, with his long hair tied together into a ponytail with a piece of grass. This youth was exceedingly handsome with flawless facial features along with a delicate yet roguelike look. On his calm face was a face full of charm that could practically kill any woman in the world. This youth was Jian Chen. In this 1 year, Jian Chen hadn't left the magical beast mountain range at all. After 1 year of using the monster cores from the mercenaries, there were practically no more Class 3 monster cores left. Only the Class 1 and 2 monster cores remained. In that 1 year, all of the Class 3 monster cores were completely exhausted, and so Jian Chen could only use the Class 4 monster cores. Soon enough, even the Class 4 monster cores were used up, causing Jian Chen to go to the depths of the mountain range to hunt and kill Class 4 magical beasts before continuing to cultivate. Time and time again, Jian Chen had continued to cultivate using the monster cores for 1 whole year. Jian Chen had long since left the primary Saint Master level and reached the peak Saint Master level. His strength had reached a point where even killing a Class 4 magical beast was of no problem at all. 1 year has passed. How quickly time goes by. It seems that I should head out and stroll around now and stabilize my strength. After using the monster cores to cultivate, only a tiny residual of chaotic nature from the monster core's energy was left. Jian Chen muttered to himself in front of the campfire. After eating his fill, Jian Chen extinguished the fire before heading out from the depths of the magical beast mountain range. He had already planned on leaving the mountain range long ago, so he had prepared a few Class 4 monster cores to cultivate with later. The Class 4 magical beasts rarely roamed around the heart of the magical beast mountain range, so it was generally more peaceful than the outside layers, since Class 4 magical beasts were also not as common as Class 1 or 2 magical beasts. In this case, coming across a Class 4 magical beast was not an easy task, and finding a Class 3 magical beast would be even easier. Ho! Just as Jian Chen walked out of the forest carefully, suddenly, a large sound exploded out from behind him. Staring in the direction in which his ear was vibrating, Jian Qin noticed that the ground he was standing on was beginning to tremble slightly as well. Chapter 160, Appearance of a Class 5 Magical Beast. Jian Qin instantly grew serious as he heard the abrupt heaven-shaking roar. Looking in the direction of the yell, he thought to himself, for a simple roar to have such an intense effect, this must be a peak Class 4 magical beast. Just as Jian Qin had this thought, a terrifyingly strong wave of energy made its way over to him. This wave of energy was so strong that it could be seen by the naked eye as it spread throughout the air and caused havoc. Many of the ancient tall trees were slowly drawn toward the source of energy as it overwhelmed anything in the sky. Jian Qin grew even more solemn as he felt this extreme change in atmosphere. He was originally shocked by the wave of energy coming at him, but now he was stunned and couldn't help but say, with this power, it might as well be a Class 5 magical beast. The spread of the wave of energy was exceedingly fast. In a split second it had reached where Jian Qin stood, but in that moment, the energy had begun to wane in power before becoming nothing more than a strong whistle through his ears as it passed. Jian Qin's clothes were blown slightly along with his long black hair which began to drift in the wind. The angry roar of the magical beast continued to be heard throughout the area with an explosive sound. The wave of energy simultaneously continued to wreak havoc on the ground by shaking it. Jian Qin's face grew serious as he heard two different roars. His eyes revealed a small amount of surprise as he muttered, "It seems that there's two Class 5 magical beasts fighting each other." Jian Qin then immediately ran in the direction of the roars. Following the aftermath of the damage from the energy wave, Jian Qin quickly traveled toward where the fight was taking place. 500 meters ahead of Jian Qin were two Class 5 magical beasts fighting intensely against each other. Each and every time they clashed, a strong wave of energy surged out in all directions. Even the ground had started to be filled with holes as the two magical beasts fought each other, the craters being a few meters deep. Nearby trees were uprooted and thrown about, and some were even sent flying far into the sky, with the tall grass becoming nothing more than a fine powder. Hiding 500 meters away to avoid being spotted by the two Class 5 magical beasts, Jian Qin stood in a bush and watched the beasts fight with an attentive eye. Although the two magical beasts were moving at rapid speeds, Jian Qin could clearly see the minute details of their fight. Between the two magical beasts fighting, one had a color as dark as the night and a body the same size of a cow. However, on the back of its shoulders was a pair of equally dark wings. On the other side was a tiny but snowy white dog-like magical beast. Although the two magical beasts were completely different sizes, the intensity in which they were fighting at was the same. Ho! Ho! The angry snarls continuously flowed from their mouths like a bullet of energy that rippled through the air. As soon as the roars left the magical beasts' mouths, the air shook with the vibrations and caused every other sound in the area to be drowned out. This is truly the strength of a Class 5 magical beast. Jian Qin remarked as he observed the two magical beasts battle. His entire body stood firmly in place despite the ground shaking beneath him. He was, however, afraid of gaining the attention of the two magical beasts and inviting unwanted trouble. Despite Jian Qin's current strength of a peak Saint Master and being unafraid of any peak Class 4 magical beast, Jian Qin was not completely confident that he could run away from the two Class 5 magical beasts after this display of strength. Although a Class 5 magical beast only had a single level difference with a Class 4 magical beast, in between this gap was like the gap separating the heavens and the earth. The two magical beasts continued to fight for over half the day before their snarls finally began to weaken. By this point in time, the two had scars and wounds all over their bodies and were barely capable of standing up. Their bellies were moving up and down as they tried to breathe in a frantic manner. Seeing such a miserable scene, Jian Qin couldn't help but think to himself, judging by this, both sides are already at a disadvantageous stalemate. They don't even have the energy to stand and are completely exhausted. Jian Qin suddenly felt a surge of confidence. Even the blood within him seemed to boil in anticipation as his heart began to palpitate. Jian Chen lay on the ground with a small look of hesitation adorning his face. Debating furiously with himself, he finally came to a conclusion. Biting his lip, he stood up onto the ground and quickly made it over to where the magical beasts were. Ho! The two magical beasts finally realized that Jian Chen was rapidly approaching, and so they let out one more angry roar. Their eyes flashed dangerously at Jian Chen, but other than that, they couldn't do anything else. Just as he got within 100 meters of the two, Jian Chen suddenly stopped as his face grew unnaturally serious. Even though the magical beasts in front of him were injured, that didn't make Jian Chen any less cautious. Slowly walking forward, Jian Chen advanced one step at a time towards the two Class 5 magical beasts. At the same time, the light wind sword appeared within his hand with a hazy glow surrounding the blade as if swallowing it. Ho! Class 5 magical beasts all had a good amount of intelligence. They had long since realized what Jian Chen was trying to do. With another threatening roar at Jian Chen, they warned him to not get any closer. Jian Chen paid no heed to the angry roars of the magical beasts and carefully approached closer and closer to them. At the same time, Jian Chen had wanted to charge at the magical beasts to kill them, but for the sake of his own health, he had to be more cautious. After all, these were Class 5 magical beasts, not Class 4 magical beasts. Chapter 161, Battling the Class 5 Magical Beast. Seeing how Jian Chen continued to get closer, the two tired Class 5 magical beasts grew even more frantic. If they were at their peak conditions, then they naturally wouldn't put a peak Saint Master within their notice, but at this moment they were at anything but their peak condition. After such a furious battle, the two were clearly very injured and could do nothing. Even their inner energy had been completely used up. In such a state, a Saint Master, or even a great saint would be able to come up to them and kill them. The two magical beasts struggled for a moment, seemingly trying to stand. However, despite their efforts, they weren't able to even accomplish this extremely simple task. With this pitiful display, the heart that was struggling to leap out of Jian Chen's throat finally began to calm down a little. However, he still continued to maintain a great amount of vigilance just in case something else happened. Continuing to walk closer and closer to the magical beasts, Jian Chen had quickly gotten within 30 meters of the two. Now that he was even closer, the amount of vigilance Jian Chen had increased greatly. Ho! At this moment, the snowy white-colored dog-like magical beast began to snarl once more. A large amount of energy gathered within its mouth before compressing to form a sphere of energy as the magical beast warned Jian Chen with its eyes. The other cow-like magical beast stared firmly at Jian Chen as the wings on its back began to shake with a fierce amount of energy emanating from it. Jian Chen's forward advancement began to falter as he sized up the two injured magical beasts with a critical eye. Seeing how the two were gathering energy, it felt as if they were ready to take action if he got any closer. Jian Chen had started to hesitate. Despite seeing how injured these two magical beasts were, they were still emitting a strong amount of pressure at him. Just faintly, Jian Chen could detect an extremely dangerous amount of qi radiating from the two Class 5 magical beasts. The two magical beasts and Jian Chen stared nervously at each other for a moment before Jian Chen's body suddenly swayed a moment and disappeared into a blur. He had quickly charged toward the snowy white dog-like magical beast with a large amount of saint force bursting out from within as he pushed his speed to its limits. The short 30 meters dividing him and the magical beasts had quickly become non-existent as Jian Chen flew over in a split second. Just as Jian Chen approached the dog-like magical beast, his right arm shook in a smooth movement as the light wind sword stabbed straight down at its belly with a sharp amount of sword qi enforcing the blow. Ho! The Class 5 magical beast wasn't slower than Jian Chen, and the moment he had reached it, the sphere of energy gathered within the magical beast's mouth was spat out at tremendous speeds toward Jian Chen's chest. At that moment, Jian Chen took back his sword and immediately dodged to the side with a tremendous amount of effort, causing the sphere of energy to fly towards the side of him. It was a shame that this sphere of energy was traveling far too fast. Despite Jian Chen's effort to dodge the sphere, he wasn't able to completely avoid taking damage. Originally the sphere had tried to slam against Jian Chen's chest, but since Jian Chen had moved his body, it had struck firmly against his left shoulder. Bang! The sphere of energy was only the size of a small fist, but the amount of energy it contained was terrifying. As a result of the sphere smashing against Jian Chen's left shoulder, his entire body was sent flying backward. After flying 10 meters into the air, Jian Chen crashed down onto the ground and rolled away painfully before slowly reaching a painful stop. His face began to shake and started to drain of blood as a fierce amount of pain could be felt coming from his left shoulder. Jian Chen's clothes around his shoulder had been completely shredded because of that sphere of energy. At the same time, the entire top part of his body was in agony as his left shoulder had become mutilated to the point where the bones could be seen and blood continued to flow from his wound freely. Jian Chen tried to resist the intense amount of pain from his left shoulder as even moving it had tormented him. Standing up painfully, Jian Chen's eyes swung toward that dog-like magical beast. After that magical beast had attacked, the expression it had wilted as its eyes dimmed in luster. It appeared that the attack it used had used up the last of its energy, so in its current condition, it was even more tired than before. Despite the attack having caused a serious amount of damage to Jian Chen, it had not impacted his movements all that much. With a small blur, Jian Chen had already moved toward the magical beast once more with the light wind sword out and ready to strike with its sword chi. Kang! Just as the light wind sword lashed out, a white-colored blur slammed firmly against the blade of the light wind sword and caused it to divert from its original trajectory and stab into nothing but air. Immediately, Jian Chen looked at the blur but he wasn't able to figure out what exactly had blocked his sword before feeling another source of pain on his chest. Dang dang dang, the fierce amount of attacks on Jian Chen caused him to stumble a few steps back as he felt a scorching pain on his chest. Tilting his head down, he saw that his chest had turned a very deep red and blood had started to leak from it. Forcibly swallowing the blood in his throat, Jian Chen looked at the Class 5 magical beast on the ground only to see the long tail of it swaying feebly behind it. It was this tail that had just attacked Jian Chen. I didn't think I'd come across such a strong resistance against these Class 5 magical beasts, but today I will definitely take your monster core. Jian Chen bit his lip before letting his light wind sword separate itself from his hand and fly toward the magical beast. Against such a swift sword chi, the Class 5 magical beast was powerless to dodge and could only try and endure the incoming strike. The sword chi accurately shot through one of the wounds of the magical beast, causing the entire body of the beast to tremble. There was no hesitation in Jian Chen's movements. Moving forward with his light wind sword, his weapon struck the beast in the throat. PCH. This time the dog-like magical beast had already used up all of its energy to the point where even its tail wasn't able to be moved. The light wind sword met no obstruction as it stabbed deeply into the magical beast's throat. Then, the sword slid straight through the neck and then into the ground beneath it. Chapter 162, Smooth Killing. Seeing the Class 5 magical beast finally take damage, Jian Chen let out a breath in relief. The strength of a Class 5 magical beast was indeed strong to where even a peak Class 4 magical beast was nothing more than an annoying ant to them. Against a heavily injured magical beast that couldn't even muster up the energy to stand, even Jian Chen had somehow sustained a grievous amount of damage. Just as Jian Chen let out a breath of air, an intense amount of energy suddenly came toward him. Jian Chen's face grew shocked as he immediately looked up only to see a meter-long crescent-shaped blade of wind come at him from the other magical beast's wings. This crescent-shaped blade of wind carried so much energy that it caused Jian Chen to become even more serious. Jian Chen's expression became grim as he rolled to the side without any further hesitation to dodge the blade of wind. The crescent-shaped wind flew by Jian Chen's hair, causing a few strands to fly away after being cut. The crescent continued on at an extremely fast speed that destroyed anything in its path without mercy. Finally it flew 100 meters into the ground, exploded with tremendous force, causing dirt and dust to be kicked up into the air. with his body violently moving in such a way that his left shoulder had smashed into the ground several times after rolling. The pain he felt surged through his body intensely and caused his nerves to be tormented. The skin continued to spasm as he grit his teeth in pain and tried to resist the sensations. Right now there was only one Class 5 magical beast left who was glaring angrily because Jian Chen had managed to only get away with an injury. Then, the cow-like magical beast with black fur began to gather up energy once more as the wings on its back began to emanate a sort of black glow. The amount of energy floating around the area quickly went from weak to strong. The energy near the wings was even stronger. However, the glint in the magical beast's eye grew even dimmer, and before long, it wasn't even able to muster up the energy to keep its eyes completely open anymore. Sensing the strong amount of energy come from the wings of the Class 5 magical beast, Jian Chen couldn't help but retreat a few steps backward with a heavy face in preparation to dodge the incoming attack. Ho! The magical beast roared with an extremely loud voice as if it was warning Jian Chen once more to not advance. He could see in the magical beast's eyes that it was in a completely weakened state. Yet the energy condensed on its wings was ready to fire like a drawn bow. This was the last opportunity for the magical beast to live. The energy within this attack was all that was left of the magical beast's supply. If this attack missed, the magical beast would be nothing more than a lamb to the slaughter. Jian Chen's legs took a few steps backward as he stared intensely at the magical beast with even more vigilance than ever. At this moment, the light wind sword abruptly flew from Jian Chen's hand high into the air toward the magical beast and then over it before turning around to strike at it from behind. Just as Jian Chen was about to make his move, the wings on the magical beast began to tremble as a huge crescent-shaped blade of wind blew toward Jian Chen. Jian Chen had already anticipated such a move, and when the magical beast shot out the crescent-shaped gust of wind, he rolled on the ground once more. Carefully making sure that his left shoulder wouldn't drag across the ground, he dodged the attack. Soon after it attacked with its wings, the magical beast looked as if it had lost every bit of energy it had. The bright colors in its eyes lost its luster and adopted a weary look. At the same time, the light wind sword in the air began to tremble as it fell down with a tremendous amount of sword chi radiating from the entirety of its blade. Soon enough, the entire sword was wrapped within a light glow. Bathed within the white glow, the light wind sword's blade couldn't be seen from the outside, making it seem very mysterious. Immediately following the sound of the sound barrier being broken, the light wind sword flew toward the back of the magical beast with a tremendous speed. Kacha! The loud sound of a collision could be heard as the extremely sharp point of the light wind sword broke through the skull of the magical beast and inserted itself deeply into its brain. Ho! The magical beast let out a miserable scream that rang through the air and even shook the eardrums of Jian Chen with its vibrations. The vibrations began to weaken after some time before disappearing completely along with the remaining light in the magical beast's pupils. Quickly, the eyelids of the magical beast closed off its eyes to the world. With some effort, Jian Chen crawled up from the ground unsteadily with a pale face as he looked at the light wind sword that was impaled in the magical beast's skull. He couldn't help but have a victorious smile adorn his face at this fortunate sight. It finally died. The strength of a Class 5 magical beast is indeed strong. I didn't think two heavily injured Class 5 magical beasts would require so much effort to kill. It seems that the last encounter with the Golden Fur Tiger King wasn't the full extent of its strength. Jian Chen murmured weakly. Afterward, Jian Chen walked toward the cow-like magical beast and pulled out his sword from the head. Sitting down, he began to gather the radiant saint force within the world essence and condense it within his body. He wasn't in any serious rush to deal with the corpses of these two magical beasts. In the first place, his body wasn't in any condition to work with the carcasses. There was also the fact that there may be other magical beasts in the vicinity, so Jian Chen's first priority would be to quickly hurry up and heal himself. Since Jian Chen had broken through to become a peak saint master, his spirit had also increased as well. He could now control the radiant saint force for not only a longer amount of time, but also a larger quantity of it as well. This time, the wound on Jian Chen's shoulder was very serious. The intense energy that struck his shoulder had even fried some parts of his wound, so even with the Radiant Saint force, the wound would take some time to heal. After 4 hours, the milky white glow that surrounded Jian Chen gradually dissipated, revealing Jian Chen's body inside. His face was somewhat pale despite looking better than the condition he was in before. After using the Radiant Saint force to heal such a wound for 4 hours, he was rather exhausted, but at the very least, he wasn't feeling extremely drowsy like he used to feel. Using the Radiant Saint force for 4 hours had a very mysterious effect. The wound on his shoulder had already fully healed without even a single blemish showing on his skin. Chapter 163, Leaving the Magical Beast Mountain Range. Jian Chen slowly opened his eyes from his cross-legged meditation position. Turning his head to look at the wound that used to be there on his left shoulder, he raised a hand to gingerly touch the new skin over it. Feeling the skin without noticing any strange peculiarity with it, Jian Chen could only sigh in admiration of the effects of the Radiant Saint force. Jian Chen tore off his damaged clothing to reveal his blood-splattered body underneath. Then, using the pieces of clothing he had ripped off, he began to wipe away the blood. Slowly standing up, Jian Chen's eyes looked at the corpses of the 2 Class 5 magical beasts on the ground with a profound look. Based on the appearances, this snowy white magical beast must be the Quick Cloud Beast. The book said that the body of a Quick Cloud Beast was small, but was unnaturally nimble with fur that resembled the clouds above in the sky. And this other magical beast with wings on its back, this must be the magical Skywing Cow. The wings on its back can only be used to attack, and cannot be used to fly with. In a flash, Jian Chen had remembered the information he had seen back in Kargath Library to identify the corpses in front of him. The magical Skywing Cow's monster core is hidden underneath the wings, I'm sure, and the Quick Cloud Beast has it in its skull. The light wind sword appeared in Jian Chen's hands before it quickly stabbed into the body of the Quick Cloud Beast and dug around in its head. After some effort, the monster core of the Quick Cloud Beast was extracted, causing the dog-like magical beast, in the end, to resemble something grotesque. This Quick Cloud Beast was a Class 5 magical beast, but because of their species type and limited potential, their body was never able to grow past 2 meters unless they reached the Class 6 level. Because of this, even the monster core within their body was only the size of a walnut. After extracting the Quick Cloud Beast's monster core, Jian Chen moved on to the magical Skywing Cow and used his light wind sword to stab into the area below the wings for the monster core. Then, with a great amount of effort, he finally extracted the monster core from its body. In contrast to the other monster core, this one was half the size of a fist. Jian Chen dried off the blood from both monster cores using the ripped-off pieces of his shirt before revealing 2 sparkling pieces of crystal-like items. Feeling the amount of energy hidden away within the monster cores, Jian Chen couldn't help but feel a little fearful inside. It was no wonder there was such a difference between a Class 5 and a Class 4 magical beast. Just looking at the monster cores, anyone could clearly tell the difference. In comparison to a Class 4 monster core, a Class 5 monster core had an extreme qualitative leap that would be incredibly difficult to try to make a comparison with. Also, despite the 2 monster cores coming from different magical beasts, the amount of energy contained inside was hardly any different. With just these 2 Class 5 monster cores alone, I suspect that they will last me a very long time as I cultivate with them. Grasping both Class 5 monster cores in his hand, Jian Chen couldn't help but feel happy. In his heart, this was nothing but good fortune. The happy mood continued for another small moment before becoming tranquil once more. Taking out his space belt, he placed both Class 5 monster cores and the corpses inside. The carcasses of a Class 5 monster core was very valuable, so Jian Chen couldn't abandon them like he did the Class 3 or Class 4 magical beasts. With these 2 carcasses alone, Jian Chen could sell them for a high price since any corpse of a Class 5 magical beast or higher was usually an object that had no standard price in any city. The reason was because the blood and meat of a magical beast of such a high class was good for the body when consumed. The high-quality meat of a magical beast could even increase one's strength or alter the body in a certain way. The bigger of the two magical beasts here was the magical skywing cow, which was around 4 meters big. Meanwhile, the quick cloud beast was only a meter wide, so Jian Chen could just barely fit them both into his space belt. After storing away the two magical beasts into his space belt, Jian Chen took out another set of clean clothes and put it on. Although he hadn't left the magical beast mountain range in a long time, the amount of clothes he had taken from the other mercenaries wasn't lacking. After taking care of everything, Jian Chen immediately left the area. Although the fight between two Class 5 magical beasts had scared away all of the surrounding Class 4 magical beasts, he wasn't completely sure there were not other Class 5 magical beasts that might have wandered close by. If one more Class 5 magical beast came, Jian Chen wouldn't be able to fight against it at all. Even with his peak Saint Master strength, he didn't even have any confidence that he could run away from a Class 5 magical beast. Unless he were to come across a species that was particularly slow, otherwise he wouldn't have a chance to escape. In a flash, another half-month had gone by. In the depths of the magical beast mountain range, Jian Chen stabbed through the heart of a cyan-colored python and extracted its monster core. Then, he grabbed a handful of the grass below to wipe off the blood on it. This half-month I've only collected 10 Class 4 monster cores. For the sake of my cultivation, I should keep some just in case. For now, instead of trying to increase my strength, I should try to resolve any issues within my body. Otherwise, the berserk elements within the monster cores may cause some sort of issue. In any case, I should leave this area and take a look at the situation on the outside. Jian Chen cleaned off the rest of the blood on the fist-sized Class 4 monster core as he finished talking. Besides, I'm still carrying the final wishes of Kendall. I must find his family quickly. Leaving the magical beast mountain range, he traveled for another 2 days after passing through the forests and killing countless numbers of magical beasts and wild beasts before finally coming to a large grassland. Jian Chen didn't return to Wake City because Tianxiong Lai of the Tianxiong clan possessed an Earth attribute Saint Force. With that Earth Saint Force, he held the superior defensive advantage over Jian Chen's nimble sword play. Not only that, but Tianxiong Lai's strength was also at the peak Great Saint Master, so until that man was dead, Jian Chen wouldn't want to carelessly walk back there. Also, with the Tianxiong clan being one of the hegemons in Wake City, they surely must have many personal connections despite their heavy losses in the magical beast mountain range. The moment Jian Chen came back, he may or may not come across another Great Saint Master, or even be encircled by multiple Great Saint Masters. Chapter 164, Group of Prairie Wolves. At this moment, there was a flash in Jian Chen's eyes before he suddenly stopped. Right in front of him, Jian Chen could detect the movements of something going through the grass. There was a cold glint in Jian Chen's eyes as he surveyed the patch of grass in front of him. His ears twitched as he continued to listen for the smallest sounds of movement in his surroundings. A look of disdain adorned Jian Chen's face as he flew in the direction that the noise of the movements was coming from. Within a few breaths, the sounds of movement could be heard even louder than before, to the point of being able to hear them even without paying attention. Plus, the shaking within the grass could be clearly seen now, almost as if the wind was blowing in a specific area. Suddenly, a countless number of shadows flew out from behind the tall grass. Jian Chen was very calm as he walked forward. In his right hand the light wind sword condensed into existence as he grabbed it. How? At this moment, the sound of a wolf could be heard as a blue-colored figure leaped out from the grass toward Jian Chen. Without even a sideways glance, Jian Chen shook his right arm slightly as the blue figure flew close by him. The light wind sword in his right hand became a streak of silver light as he walked past the flying creature. Just as the blue-colored figure leaped out at him, it abruptly fell to the ground. Looking down, all Jian Chen could see was a blue-colored wolf with a stream of blood leaking from its throat. Just as this wolf fell to the ground, a barrage of wolves flew out from the tall grass at Jian Chen. One of them opened its large jaw wide, causing the irony scent of blood to waft out and attack the nose to an unbearable degree. Still with a calm expression, Jian Chen continued to stab out with his sword at lightning-quick speed as he struck each incoming wolf fatally in the throat. These blue wolves were only at the class 1 to 2 level, so Jian Chen didn't feel threatened by them at all. From behind the cover of the tall grass, blue wolves continued to leap out as they charged at Jian Chen. However, Jian Chen's forward pace didn't falter even a single step as he brandished his weapon in a web of sword strokes. Each and every second his sword would swing out around him, and with each swing, another wolf was struck fatally. The amount of blue wolves hidden in the grass numbered within the thousands as they formed a circle around Jian Chen that was around 100 meters in circumference. Now that Jian Chen was firmly sealed in, the blue wolves could stalk quietly behind the tall grass, yet while Jian Chen could easily kill a blue wolf, there was only 20 of them dead by his hands. Although he realized just how many blue wolves were around him, Jian Chen still didn't seem to take it seriously. Against a group of Class 1 or Class 2 magical beasts, Jian Chen could easily kill each of them in one strike without wasting any energy at all. Even if a group of mercenaries were to come across this pack of blue wolves, they would definitely have a headache after dealing with them, even if they had a great Saint Master with them. A Class 2 magical beast would have an extremely difficult time hurting a great Saint Master, but when there was 1,000 of them, they wouldn't just stand around and let you kill them, they would all come in for the kill. Within the prairie, these blue wolves were a very common sight, but after killing countless blue wolves, the light wind sword in Jian Chen's hands was almost like the scythe of the god of death, mercilessly reaping the lives of the magical beasts. Without exception, each and every wolf that leaped at Jian Chen had its throat stabbed mid-roar. Even in midair, they were unable to escape the rapidness that was Jian Chen's scythe-like sword. Behind Jian Chen, the massive amount of blood had already turned into a single line that splattered on top of the tall grass. As for the blue wolves' bodies, they were all neatly piled up on top of each other in a single line. Despite this indiscriminate slaughter by Jian Chen, the wolves leapt out from the tall grass one by one in an endless stream, almost as if they weren't afraid of injuries or death. In the eyes of any spectator, it was almost like Jian Chen was a hated enemy that they were ready to die for in order to kill. The blood of the blue wolves continued to splatter into the air as the light wind sword covered the sky with its blade, and after being mixed with blood, the shine of the sword was unmistakably distinguishable. Jian Chen's body didn't have any unnatural movements. From the start of this massacre to now, he had calmly continued on in a single line without the blue wolves being able to attack him from the front or back. Yet, they were also unable to stop his forward momentum. This massacre continued for another hour, and not too long after, Jian Chen had already killed several hundred blue wolves without a single speck of blood landing on his body. Oh, at this moment, the fierce snarl of a wolf came from behind. It was a command for the wolves that immediately called each wolf in the front of the circle to retreat behind, leaving behind several hundred corpses without a single trace of their retreat. The pack of wolves had come quickly, but they had also left quickly. In the blink of an eye, not a single trace could be seen of the blue wolves, except for the blood of the hundreds of dead that left a single path on the ground. Seeing how the wolves had retreated, Jian Chen took back his light wind sword. Despite this extensive close-ranged combat, Jian Chen's face wasn't red, and neither was he breathing hard. The rumors said that the magical beasts in the prairie were unnaturally vicious. It would seem that this rumor is true. Each wolf came at me with no regards for its life or any fear either. Jian Chen thought to himself. Even after that ordeal, Jian Chen's direction didn't change as he continued to walk down a single line. With all the corpses behind him, he didn't pay any attention to them since they were only Class 1 and Class 2 magical beasts. Despite the amount of bodies, a person of Jian Chen's strength didn't care for it since it wasn't worth the time spent harvesting and storing away the bodies. This was certainly not a task Jian Chen had wanted to waste time doing. The area of this grassland was expansive, so Jian Chen could walk for 2 days before he would finally reach the end of the area, which turned into a desolate piece of land. After walking for another 4 hours, he finally made his way to an official road where he could see the leftover marks of a carriage that had driven by. On the road, a small group of caravans were slowly advancing in the direction of Jian Chen. Chapter 165, Mysterious Person. Looking at the group, Jian Chen could clearly distinguish their figures despite being thousands of meters away. That was because the group only had 10 caravans and personnel numbering around 40 men. Each one of them was sitting on a tall horse with a rather luxurious-looking caravan in the middle of the group. With Jian Chen's regular walking pace, he had quickly met up with the group of caravans. Each one of the mercenaries sitting on top of the horses stared sharply at Jian Chen. After a few of them looked over Jian Chen's figure, they each looked away from him as if they didn't care for him. Just as Jian Chen was about 5 meters away from the caravan group, the two sides suddenly stopped since Jian Chen's path was blocking their group from continuing forward. At this, the mercenaries that had glanced at Jian Chen from before no longer looked friendly. A few of them had already started to have a small amount of killing intent in their eyes. "Who are you, and why do you block our path?" an older man bellowed at Jian Chen. Not caring for the other man's temper, Jian Chen waved his hand and said, "Fellow travelers, this one has found himself lost, so this one wonders if some questions could be asked for a moment." Hearing this, many of the mercenaries furrowed their eyebrows. For mercenaries that traveled the continent, if they weren't familiar with the terrain, then many would bring a map with them. People like Jian Chen were not commonly seen, so the words spoken by Jian Chen couldn't be taken so easily. "Less of your fucking bull, hurry up and scram, otherwise don't blame this uncle for being impolite," one of the more violent mercenaries snarled out. This elder man stalked forward with his muscles rippling in a way that exploded into everyone's view while also seeing the short pants he was wearing. Jian Chen's face tilted down slightly as he looked coldly at the mercenary who spoke. "You better clean your mouth, or else you may find that all it'll take to lose your life would be one phrase." Hearing this mercenary's words, they had clearly annoyed Jian Chen. The words of Jian Chen said caused the color of the other mercenaries to drop a few shades. The one that had been looking at Jian Chen couldn't help but feel his heart tremble as if a sudden chill had descended over the area. At first the man had felt a bit cowardly, but the moment he had realized the one who was threatening him was only 20 years old, the cowardice within him turned to anger before a slightly low voice could be heard from behind him. "Fellow friend, the words you say are too much." From this voice, everyone turned to see a middle-aged man riding a black horse slowly approach them. The look on his face was a bit gloomy, but there was an icy tint to his eyes as he looked down at Jian Chen. "Captain Lon. Captain Lon." The moment this man emerged with his black horse, all of the surrounding mercenaries began to call out his name. Jian Chen looked at the man and said, "Before saying something like that, you should first discipline your subordinates." The big mercenary snorted and glared dangerously at Jian Chen. "How arrogant, you're nothing more than a boy who hasn't been taught by his mommy. To dare disrespect our captain, why don't I bring your mother here to help discipline you?" Leaping from his horse, he began to walk toward Jian Chen with his fist outstretched. Hearing this talk about his mother, Jian Chen's face suddenly changed as a tremendous spike of killing intent flowed from his eyes. Lifting up his left hand, he blocked the incoming slap from the older man and then immediately planted his right hand into his stomach. "Kacha!" Immediately the sound of bones could be heard breaking as Jian Chen's Saint Force-enhanced fist struck against the man's stomach. Straight away, a dent could be seen in his chest. "Ah!" With a miserable howl, the man's face was completely filled with a violent expression as his tanned face grew pale. Straight after, Jian Chen's figure disappeared in a blur as his leg planted itself against the man's chest once more with a biting cold gust of wind. The mercenary was sent flying high into the air before finally landing 10 meters away on the ground with a resounding bang. Dust was knocked up into the air as blood came spurting out of the man's mouth. His face, which was already very pale, had started to wither a bit. Seeing how that older mercenary was struggling to crawl up from the ground, the other mercenaries looked on in disbelief. With a stunned look as their only reaction, they slowly started to shout and pull out their saint weapons to charge at Jian Chen. "Stay your hand!" The one named Captain Lon suddenly called out from his black horse. In an instant he had instantly stopped every single mercenary from charging at Jian Chen. Captain Lan urged his horse forward as he looked at Jian Chen with a serious face. Honored one, do you truly just wish for directions without any other motive? Correct. Jian Chen nodded his head. Captain Lan, give this junior here a map. Just as Jian Chen finished talking, an elderly voice came from behind. While the voice was very elderly sounding, the air became rather imposing. Hearing that elderly voice, Jian Chen turned his head to look behind to see a small group of luxurious caravans make their way toward him. An expression of respect grew on Captain Lan's face as he cupped his hands in the direction of the caravans. Yes, elder. Seeing the display Captain Lan was showing, Jian Chen's eyes flickered slightly. Looking at the caravans, he could tell that there were indeed people in the caravans, but because of the distance, he wasn't able to gauge their exact strength. Then, Captain Lan took out a rolled-up piece of parchment from his space belt and threw it at Jian Chen. This is the map of the Blue Wind Kingdom, take it. Jian Chen unraveled the parchment and took a brief glance on it before rolling it back together. Cupping his hands, he left the area without any further words. Watching Jian Chen's body grow even more distant, Captain Lan cried out, forward. After picking up the mercenary that had been struck down by Jian Chen and placing him on a horse, the group began to continue on with their path. Jian Chen continued to watch the caravan fade away from the side for a while. He knew that the man leading the caravans was a peak great saint master, so to have such a man have a respectful tone, Jian Chen was truly curious about the man inside the caravans. The only thing he could sense within the caravans was merely the breathing of a person. Other than that, there was nothing. Ha, youngster, for a youth to possess a strength like yours, that is not an easy task. Continue to work hard. I believe that not too far in the future, you will surely shake the continent. When Jian Chen had passed the caravans, he could faintly hear the elderly voice whisper into his ears almost as if the elder were standing right next to him. Jian Chen's face had changed slightly as he suddenly went rigid. Immediately looking around himself, he didn't see anyone around him. So he stared in disbelief at the caravan that had just passed by. He had just heard this elder's voice from inside the caravan. Even with the incredulous look on Jian Chen's face, the mercenaries that were guarding the caravans appeared to not have noticed the sound. Their faces had no difference than before Jian Chen had heard the sound. Youngster, if you can one day make it to the Holy Empire, then you can find me using this badge. At that moment, the elderly voice came back once more without the same mysterious tone. At the same time as the voice, a purple shining badge flew out from the window and into the hands of Jian Chen. The few mercenaries guarding the caravan suddenly turned to look at Jian Chen with a look of extreme envy and at the object in his hand with some doubt. Seeing this purple metal that was shining in his hand, Jian Chen's heart began to feel as if waves were constantly crashing over him. It was at that moment that he had realized the mysterious figure sitting in this caravan was undoubtedly an unmeasurably deep expert. He hadn't expected to receive this metal, but he knew that this metal was definitely not something normal people could get. There was a strange feeling within Jian Chen's heart. For a person to be so strong in the caravan, why was it that the strongest person in his group was only a peak great saint master? The average strength in this group was only a great saint, with some that weren't even at that level. Also to have so many goods being transported in the open like this, could it be this person didn't even have a space belt or space ring? Kiki, as the caravans traveled further away, the clear sounds of a cough could be heard. Jian Chen looked at the caravan with his eyes, but his heart was not as tranquil as it usually was. Who? Jian Chen let out a long breath of air as he looked at the purple metal in his hands. This metal was only the size of his hand and was a finger wide and heavy to the touch. This metal was made entirely from purple coins, so there must have been a special way to refine and create this object. And since it was made from purple coins, the price of this item would be unnaturally high. The Holy City in the Holy Empire, that is one of the capital cities in the Tianyuan continent. It's also where the ruler of the Holy Empire resides. Just what identity does this mysterious man have? Jian Chen muttered. Chapter 166, Phoenix City. After meeting the mysterious person within the caravan, Jian Chen had some doubts. Judging from how that Captain Lan had so respectfully called out to the elder in the caravan and that Jian Chen couldn't measure the elder's strength at all, the elder was definitely not a great Saint Master. Against great Saint Masters, Jian Chen could easily discern their cultivation levels, but when it came to this elder in particular, Jian Chen had no idea. It would appear that his strength is at the very least an Earth Saint Master. But for what reason did he give me this badge? Jian Chen looked back to the purple coin-casted medal in his hand. This medal didn't have any words on it, but there were various patterns running through it. Forget it, there isn't any use to trying to figure this out. I'd best be on the road. Until I have enough strength, it would be best for me to wait until I go to the Holy City. Jian Chen decided before storing the medal into his space ring and continuing on his way. The road was unusually peaceful, there were many times where he wouldn't see anyone. Yet sometimes during the day, many caravans and mercenaries would ride by on their magical beasts. Now that he had a map, Jian Chen was no longer worried about getting lost. In accordance to the map, Jian Chen had walked for 3 days and in the end, he finally reached Phoenix City. Phoenix City was a Class 2 city encompassing an area of several hundred kilometers. By the time he reached the outskirts, there was already a steady flow of people bustling around. A group of leather-wearing mercenaries rode on magical beasts of many sizes while other caravans slowly carried their goods on the road. All sorts of topics were being made as voices blended together. Jian Chen followed the road for the final stretch of land and slowly made his way past the city walls. Walking besides Jian Chen were other mercenaries that also traveled by themselves. So Jian Chen hadn't attracted any attention to himself. By the city gates of Phoenix City, there were many guards standing perfectly straight as they watched with a cold gaze those who entered the city. "Stand still, what are you doing?" At that moment, a cold voice cried out. Turning their heads to look, everyone could see a caravan group being stopped by a single city guard. Simultaneously, a short but plump man with embroidered clothing walked forward pretending to pull the guard's hand in a friendly manner as if he was a friend. Pleasantly stuffing a few gold coins into the cold hand of the guard, the man began to smile as he spoke a few words into his ear. The guard pinched the gold coins given to him by the man before rubbing them together with a serious face before it slowly melted away. Waving his hand with a happier expression, he cried out, "You may enter." Practically every merchant that was blocked by the guards would end up having to pay a small fee to enter. This was an extremely common practice on the Tianyuan continent, but there were a few merchants that had refused to pay this toll. Of course, the guards would use the pretense of feigning that there were dangerous goods within their caravans and would not allow them to enter before forcing a search on them. This rudeness had made many people unsatisfied, but because these guards were still the garrison soldiers of the city, many people were unable to do anything about them. In the face of these guards, even some of the more violent mercenaries would only be able to suck up their anger. Jian Chen had however been able to enter Phoenix City without paying the tax. To the guards, Jian Chen was a lone traveler that wasn't escorting any sort of goods, so they didn't care about him. It was only for the merchants that they would obstruct a person's way. As a Class 2 city, Phoenix City was relatively huge, being bigger than Wake City by a large degree. As soon as Jian Chen had entered the city, he walked to the closest stable and bought himself a nice-looking horse to ride to the center of the city. Because of the wideness of the city, if one didn't have a horse to travel on, it would take over half the day to walk from the east to west gate of Phoenix City. After traveling on his horse for some time, he finally stopped at a bank. Tying up his horse, he entered the bank. Inside the bank, Jian Chen converted all of the copper, silver, and gold coins on him into purple coins. Only a few of the coins were left unconverted for him to use for daily expenses. Most of the money he had converted came from his time in the magical Beast Mountain range, where Jian Chen had taken all of the money from the dead mercenaries' bodies and space belts. Just before Jian Chen was about to put all of the coins back into his space belt, he had counted how many purple coins he had. Unexpectedly, there were around 30,000 purple coins, and added with the purple coins he already had on him, then he had a total of over 40,000 purple coins. Before he had left the bank, he had collected a purple card from the bank. This card was called the purple card by everyone on the Tianyuan continent. Purple cards were used by the entirety of the Tianyuan continent for those who wanted to save space from carrying so many purple coins. A purple card was like a space belt in that it had its own interdimensional space to hold coins, but it was used to measure the amount of purple coins. With a purple card, one would be able to freely visit any bank to access their money. Many higher institutes would even take the purple card as payment, so it was a lot more convenient than carrying around individual stacks of purple coins. The purple card was only half the size of Jian Chen's hand and was created through a special means of refinement. Although the card itself looked rather weak, it was actually very strong. Even Earth Saint Masters wouldn't be able to inflict damage to this card. Obtaining a purple card wasn't all that hard, but still not so easy that ordinary people could receive one. To obtain one, a person must have at least 10,000 purple coins. With a purple card, not only was it a symbol of one's identity, but also of one's wealth. For purple coins to be added into the purple card, it required the bank's special instrument, so ordinary men would have absolutely no way of tricking the system. However, the banks would only recognize the card and not the owner. Even if one were not the original owner, the purple card would still be usable by any bank in the Tianyuan continent. Walking out of the bank, Jian Chen held the purple card in his hand. It contained all 40,000 of his purple coins with barely any other coins left for him to use for his own personal interests. When the people in the bank had seen the purple card in Jian Chen's hands, they all looked at him with an envious expression, with many people already looking at him with other ideas. Jian Chen looked around himself at the people looking back at him and smiled. Placing the purple card in his space belt, Jian Chen mounted his horse and rode off. Chapter 167, Auction Affairs. Next, after asking around, Jian Chen arrived at a store that specialized in monster cores but was rather large. The building made of a blue stone material and had 3 stories. Although there were many mercenaries that sold monster cores, they were mainly low-leveled ones. The higher-leveled monster cores were less common to see, so if one really wanted to buy one, they would need to go to a store. The bigger the store, the higher quality the monster cores were. Plus, stores that sold monster cores had a huge supply in comparison to the mercenaries that only had 3 or 5 class 1 or 2 monster cores for sale. If some influential clans wanted to buy large quantities of monster cores, they would go to these stores to buy them. Entering the monster core shop, Jian Chen felt that despite being such a large store, there weren't many people inside. There weren't even any monster cores arranged out, with only a few female clerks that were working, but other than that, this place didn't seem like a monster core shop at all. With some confusion, Jian Chen walked toward them and asked, "Might I ask if this is where they sell monster cores?" Hearing this, the female clerk looked at Jian Chen's handsome and delicate face with an astonished face. Seeing such a handsome face like Jian Chen's had made her stop for a second before speaking up joyously. "Did you see the sign outside our store? If our Monster Core Heaven store didn't sell monster cores, then what place would this be?" Jian Chen let out an embarrassed smile as he looked at the empty halls. "Then why is there not even a single monster core out on display?" Perhaps it was because of Jian Chen's appearance that made him irresistible to women, but the clerk then stared blankly at him before explaining pleasantly, "Our Monster Core Heaven store only displays our higher-level monster cores out on the 2nd and 3rd floor. The 1st floor only has Class 1 monster cores, but since those are extremely common, there is no need to put them out on display." Hearing this, Jian Chen suddenly saw the light. This was only the first story of the store, but he hadn't realized that this was how the store functioned. The female clerk continued to say, "Which monster core did you want to buy? If you want to buy Class 1 monster cores, then just tell me how many you want to buy. But if you want to buy Class 2 monster cores, you'll have to head to the 2nd floor." Jian Chen hesitated for a moment before asking, "I'm not here to buy monster cores, but might I ask if you are buying monster cores instead?" The female clerk looked at Jian Chen with an astonished face. What? You're selling monster cores? Correct. Jian Chen nodded. An incredulous look filled the clerk's eye as she stared at Jian Chen. She didn't know why such a handsome youth was trying to sell instead of buy monster cores. She had worked at this store for many years, but this was the very first time such a person came. Usually, it was always a group of burly men. She didn't look at Jian Chen with disdain despite this. Instead, she continued to speak with a sweet smile. We also buy monster cores here, so if you please bring out the monster cores you want to sell. Jian Chen immediately took out 2 space belts and handed it over the female clerk. In these 2 space belts were Class 1 and 2 monster cores. The clerk took the 2 space belts and began to inspect the amount of monster cores inside. Quickly, a look of shock appeared on her face because the amount of Class 1 and 2 monster cores in the space belts numbered to around 2,000. This was the first time she had ever seen so many monster cores. Taking in a deep breath, the female clerk looked at Jian Chen's handsome face with a complex expression. Please wait one moment, I will be right back with the shopkeeper. Handing the space belts back to Jian Chen, she turned around and headed toward the 2nd floor. Not too long after she had left, a man wearing an embroidered blue robe came down with the same female worker. Shopkeeper Bai, this is the one that wants to sell monster cores. The female clerk said as she brought the shopkeeper to Jian Chen. The one named Shopkeeper Bai nodded his middle-aged head as he smiled at Jian Chen. Jr., would it be possible for you to bring out the monster cores for me to see? Jian Chen didn't hesitate in bringing out the space belts for Shopkeeper Bai to see. Extending his hand to inspect the contents of the space belt, Shopkeeper Bai's eyes suddenly widened in shock as well when he discovered the amount of monster cores within the space belts. To sell so many monster cores at once, this is something Phoenix City doesn't see often. The middle-aged man spoke as he studied Jian Chen. Jr., do you mind if I call you that? I hope you don't mind. Jian Chen smiled. Shopkeeper, why don't we talk about how much money you'd like to buy this for? That we can do, please allow me to think it over for a moment. The man laughed. Without any more talk, he led Jian Chen into a secret room so they could go over the monster cores. Once the monster cores were all counted for, the middle-aged man had given Jian Chen a total of 5,000 purple coins. Taking the purple coins, Jian Chen thanked the shopkeeper and walked out of the building. Riding his horse to a crowded marketplace, he began to buy several sets of clothing and other essential items for surviving in the outside world. Just then, the loud clamoring of the crowd caught Jian Chen's attention. I've heard that the annual auction will be taking place in 10 days' time. This time there'll be many precious treasures. Yeah, this auction is a must this year. Who knows what treasures will be seen there? Phoenix City's Heavenly Phoenix auction is very famous. The annual auction usually always has many people from other cities participating, so it'll definitely be crowded. An auction. Jian Chen cried out to himself as he listened to the others talk. Now thinking about this, he no longer was in any desire to stroll around the area and immediately went back onto the road to return to the center of Phoenix City to find the place everyone was talking about. The building was exceptionally tall. Despite being only 2 stories tall, it had already reached several dozen meters higher into the air than a 4-story inn nearby. Even the area it had covered was large as compared to the Mercenary Union, which was roughly the same size. On top of the great big gates to the auction house was a 3-meter-tall board that had the 4 words, Heavenly Phoenix Auction House, written in fancy calligraphy. There were many people coming in and out of the auction house as well. With a little hesitation, Jian Chen disembarked from his horse to enter the inn nearby the auction house to rent a room. After that he let the horse go. After a few days, Jian Chen strolled around before finding an isolated area, where he took out some herbs from his space belt. After the time it took to boil a cup of tea, Jian Chen stood back up with a completely different look. This time he looked more like a dark-skinned middle-aged man with relatively ordinary looks. If he were to blend into a crowd, no one would be able to remember his face other than the fact that there was a little scar on the left side of his face. After disguising himself, Jian Chen swapped out his clothes and then headed toward the Heavenly Phoenix auction house and then inside of it. After entering, he saw a steady stream of people walking in and out around him. By this time, the annual auction was about to start, so many people were already trying to register their own precious items for the auction. "Sir, might I ask what item did you want to register?" Just as Jian Chen had entered the auction house, a female worker had called out to him sweetly. "Could you please bring out the official for this place? I have a few things to discuss with him." A deep voice came from Jian Chen's throat. He had even changed what he sounded like. "Yes, please wait for a moment." The female worker studied Jian Chen before excusing herself from the area to walk further into the auction house. In a flash, a white-haired man wearing rich-looking clothes walked toward Jian Chen with the female worker right behind with a respectful face. "Elder Huang, this is the person looking for you." The female spoke up before turning to Jian Chen. "Sir, this is our Heavenly Phoenix auction house high-leveled appraiser, Elder Huang." Jian Chen cupped his hands together as a greeting. His greeting was completely ignored by the elder, who instead looked at him and asked, "What business might you have?" Jian Chen's eyes swept around himself to look at the nearby people in the auction house before replying, "Elder Huang, I have a few precious things that I would like to sell. Would Elder like to talk about them?" Hearing the words of Jian Chen, the elder's eyes flashed before gesturing Jian Chen toward a secured room to talk. Jian Chen and the elder sat down on the opposite sides of a table. Although the room wasn't all that big, the soundproofing was very good in here, so their negotiation could be done freely without the worry of anyone from the outside listening in. "Sir, you should have brought the item you wanted to auction off to Elder Show." When the two sat down, the elder couldn't help but say that. "Ha, Elder Huang, I wanted to auction something, but it must remain confidential." Jian Chen laughed before taking his space belt out. "Then you can rest easily. Our Heavenly Phoenix auction house is well respected among all cities and will not divulge even the smallest bit of information to anyone." The elder smiled before inspecting the space belt given to him. The moment the elder looked inside the space belt, his eyes suddenly froze along with his face as he looked at the contents with shock and disbelief. This is the body of a Class 5 magical beast. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.